In the previous fight just now, every time he was hit hard, Ross's power of distortion was agitated once and it became more and more intense, especially the first time, as if it wanted to break through his body and burst out. He did not like gambling, but at this time, like Fujitora, he had to place his hopes on gambling. Whether a coin flying into the sky lands with a head or a tail depends on the last fight. Ice block. Pheasant beak. After Aokiji landed, he raised his right arm which instantly turned into a frostbird that charged towards Ross, and wherever it went, the air seemed to freeze into ice. Faced with the attack, Ross took a deep breath, folded his hands in front of him, made a virtual grasp and rushed out in front of the icebird. Distortion impact. The power of distortion converges on both palms, vaguely letting the air appear in the form of distortion. Ross's palms hit the icebird's head. Kacha. Kacha. The power of distortion is like a whirlpool. In Ross's palms, the constant explosion of the power of distortion on Ross's palms is raised to the limit. The icebird slams into this whirlpool created by the power of distortion and breaks down from the head and finally breaks into pieces of ice that splashed around. Aokiji breathed out a cold breath, and when the bird broke to its last point, he took a step forward and turned his arm into a spear and hit Ross hard. Wrapped in a strong cold, this attack flew towards Ross, trying to freeze Ross into ice. ZZ. Under the impact of the spear, Ross utilized the power of distortion to its limit to resist. His whole body was pushed back bit by bit and the ice under his feet was filled with deep cracks, and it constantly cracked, like plowing. At the moment, the power of distortion in Ross's body is boiling, constantly rushing up and down, gathering between his palms, colliding with the sphere that has come towards him. It's like a very tenacious spring that is under very heavy pressure. It closes up bit by bit and gradually tightens to the limit. It's compressed to the limit. His physique body that he has been exercising day after day, the physical enhancement that has always been the core of promotion, the talent that was activated not long ago, tenacious. All of this has been transformed into a force that fixed the spring so that the spring is gradually tightened to the extreme and not exceed the bearing limit. What is Devil Fruit Awakening? Zone is an extraordinary body and regenerative ability, while Paramecia is from inside to outside, allowing forces to rush out of the body, no longer confined to the body and can act on the outside. The process from the inside to the outside is the most important and difficult one. Few people can do it, even fewer than rare ancient zone Devil Fruit. The enormous pressure from Aokiji has become the great power of the compression spring, and Ross's body has become the essence of the spring tenacious. Under constant confrontation, the spring was finally pushed to the limit and reached its highest and strongest limit. Then, it popped up violently. The mystery of Devil Fruit's awakening is inspired at this moment. Ah! Ross burst out with an unprecedented roar, the ability to be oppressed to the limit, coming out with a fierce explosion in his body and pounding out from the palms of his hands. The power of distortion turns into a terrifying whirlpool and the vast impact goes ahead, whether it is air or ice, or the earth. Everything falls apart under the explosion of power of distortion, and everything is nothing in front of it at this moment. How could it be? The expressions on Aokiji's face changed for the first time. Ross made a sonic explosion and light explosion, which, although unexpected, did not shock him. People like Ross, who are powerful, always have some hidden attacks, an ace up their sleeves. But now this scene is no longer a hidden attack, but a change beyond his expectation. Ross clearly has reached his limit earlier and now he suddenly burst out with even more power. Kacha. Kacha. Aokiji did not hold back any of his power as he utilized armament hockey and crossed his arms in front of him to fight the coming distortion storm. He doesn't know how long it took, but the terrifying force of distortion finally dissipated and the scattered ice was splashed in all directions and the dust slowly dissipated. On the field, between Ross and Aokiji, there is an area of tens of meters, which is sunken by the ice-covered earth, as if it had been swallowed up by something. More precisely, it's like a cylindrical area that under the influence of the power of distortions is swept up and strangled, all of which break up into extremely tiny debris. Devil Fruit Awakening. As Marine Headquarters Admiral, Aokiji naturally understood the concept of Devil Fruit Awakening. The only explanation that can explain Ross's sudden rise in power and its impact on a large area of nearby space is the Devil Fruit Awakening. Otherwise, Ross would not have been hit by him several times in a row and he would have to deal with it directly with all of his strength. Ross stood there and took a deep breath. There was an unspeakable fluency all over his body as if every pore was breathing. It was like a dehydrated fish has entered the water. This is the awakening of Devil Fruit. Devil Fruit Awakening ability is free from physical restraint and can directly affect the outside world, just like Logia, directly transforming the power of distortions from inside to the outside world. Thank you for your help. Things finally got interesting. Ross slowly opened his eyes and looked at Aokiji. A faint smile appeared on his bloody face. Without Aokiji, he would not be able to practice by himself, and he wouldn't be able to compress the spring to its maximum length that made it snape and awakened his devil fruit power. Battles are indeed the most effective way to stimulate potential, especially when such one-sided repression is forced upon the body and the threat of death become very real. Aokiji's face became a bit ugly. Such a change was entirely unexpected, but even if Ross had awakened his devil fruit powers, as Marine Headquarters Admiral, he was still in control of the battle victory or defeat. Next, it's my turn to fight back. Ross looked at Aokiji with a twinkling eye and a strong sense of warfare and ferocity in his voice. He suddenly rushed towards Aokiji, with his right hand's fingers pointing at Aokiji and tearing away. His fingers instantaneously emerged in a round, much more transparent than Tremor Fruit, Gura Gura no Mi, with only a slight arc of light that burst out in front of him. Sneer. The outbreak of the power of distortion blatantly tore towards Aokiji, where the earth and air were all torn apart by the disintegration distortion. Aokiji's face changed slightly, his palms closed in front of him, and Ice Fruit's ability was stimulated, instantly turning into a huge ice wall, blocking Ross's power of distortion. Bang! The power of distortion falls on the ice wall, instantly giving it a shape of distribution as a sudden depression appeared on the ice wall, and then the ice wall bursts into pieces and turns them into splashes of crushed ice everywhere. Just as Aokiji was waiting for Ross's next attack, he suddenly could not find him. Seeing the fierce fighting at the moment before, Ross, who seemed to want to revenge on him, fled to the distance without turning his head after the blow, leaving only one afterimage behind. What a joke! Not to mention the injuries on his body, even in the state of full power, the gap between Aokiji and him cannot be directly reversed because of the fruit awakening. His strength only equals to that of Doflamingo's was in the war of the best. Damn! After being played by Ross, Aokiji showed a wave of anger on his face and chased after him without hesitation. But before he could rush out far, the ice in front of him suddenly cracked weirdly. Under Ross's remote stimulation, it was as if two continental plates had collapsed and one was rising and the other was sinking. Blocked by a hindrance, Ross's back has disappeared into the fog, and only his observation haki can still sense the location of Ross, and he was getting farther and farther. Don't try to run away. Aokiji's face was repressed and terrible as he continued to chase Ross. After the awakening of the devil fruit, Ross not only had the ability to remotely throw out the power of distortions like Whitebeard, but the power of distortions also increased dramatically. Correspondingly, the effect of gravity distortion has also improved a lot. By utilizing Geppo, Moonwalk, his speed is only a little slower than full-powered Aokiji. As for why it is a little slower, because Aokiji is not simply using Geppo, Moonwalk. Every step he falls, the void condenses into a square ice cube, which is struck by his foot, and he uses its force to make himself faster. Even this means has been exerted. Aokiji is very annoyed on the one hand. On one hand, the purpose of this trip was to destroy the Ghost Hand pirates, but now not only Lafitte and others have escaped, but even Ross is going to escape. In an instant, they rushed out of the thriller bark and pushed farther and farther into the fog. Aokiji's speed is still slightly faster than Ross's, but when Ross's power of distortion can be released remotely, there is too much room to slow down Aokiji's attack, and there is no need to fight Aokiji head-on. They ran after each other and disappeared in the sky. A few days later, in the fog, a wooden block that is about 4 or 5 meters wide and about 7 or 8 meters long is slowly floating on the sea, and it is very strange, as if it was driving itself to hell. On this wooden complex, Law is sitting in a corner carrying the demon knife. Robin is sitting there. Lafitte is standing on the edge with a mahogany cane, trying to catch fish in the sea. Sneer. Suddenly, he plunged the mahogany stick into the sea. A sharp piercing penetrated the water and instantly penetrated a fish swimming several meters below. Lafitte salvaged the fish, lit a flame, and began to do simple processing. More than 3 days after escaping from the thriller bark, Robin and Law finally recovered and did not die of freezing. It's been 3 days. The food is good, but there's nothing we can do about fresh water. My ability can be used to break down a little fresh water. Law opened his eyes and opened his mouth in silence. With his present abilities and stamina, though extremely reluctant, he was able to produce a little fresh water needed to sustain the lives of 3 people. That's okay, I don't know when Captain can come. Lafitte shrugged his shoulders as he handled the fish. Robin took out a white moving card from her pocket, stared at the card for a moment and shook her head slightly, saying, "The direction has not changed for a long time. That card is Ross's Vivre card. Vivre card represents a sign of a person's life and moves slowly in that person's direction. Ross collected Vivre card materials after taking CP9 and made one for himself, Robin, Law, Lafitte, and Shilu. The 5 Vivre cards were all torn up into 4 copies, each with its own name, and each was given to different people for preservation in order to know the crew's life and location. Shilu's Vivre card has been completely destroyed and Ross's Vivre card was half destroyed a few days ago, but it stopped being destroyed and remained intact. And, during these days, Ross's Vivre card's direction of movement has been changing, indicating that Ross's direction has been changing, possibly entangled with Aokiji. Until 4 hours ago, the direction of the Vivre card's movement did not change, so there were only 2 possibilities. One was that Ross did not move, the other was that Ross was coming to them. Either way, Ross should be out of danger. Well, it seems that Captain has got rid of Marine Admiral. It's really our captain, whoop. Lafitte showed a smile on his face. A captain who can get rid of a Marine Admiral's pursuit, it's an exciting thing. It means that they have a foothold in the sea. But this time it's still our tragic defeat. Robin's delicate 5 fingers folded gently holding Ross's Vivre card in her palm and then sighed. Ghost Shadow Ship was frozen into ice sculpture by Aokiji and might be able to use it after recovery, but they could not return to the Thriller bark to find the Ghost Shadow Ship. Moreover, Shilu's Vivre card was destroyed, which also indicated that Shilu should have died in Aokiji's hands. As for other crew members and handymen, they were either destroyed by Aokiji or they are all in Marine's hands. We are still alive, this is enough. Law, sitting on the other side, spoke quietly and calmly. It's a victory to survive against Marine Admiral. Lafitte raised his lips and said, "That's right. The fish is ready. Come and eat it." After sharing the fish, the 3 continued to drift in the mist. They don't know how long it has been. A dark shadow appeared in the fog, which flew in the air and gradually approached, falling into the perception range of Lafitte and others. Lafitte had just crossed his cane and showed a trace of alertness. Then suddenly he loosened his alertness and showed a smile because he had seen the shape of the dark shadow. Whiz! Compared with Lafitte and others, the shadow looked worse. His clothes were damaged everywhere with a lot of clotted blood on them. The shadow broke through the mist and landed on the raft. "Welcome back, Captain." Lafitte smiled at Ross, pinched the corner of his hat and bowed to Ross. Robin's face, which had been low for several days, also showed a slight smile. "Hey," Ross looked at Robin and others. Although they were more and more confused, he still showed a slight smile and laughed loudly without hiding it. Law sat in a corner and smiled. Lafitte followed Ross with a burst of laughter. The laughter spread out in the mist and passed to the depth of the mist. He laughed for a while. Ross and others returned to their usual calmness. Despite the loss of Ghost Shadow Ship and the death of Shilu at the hands of Aokiji, 4 of them are still alive, which is enough. It is impossible to meet Marine Admiral without paying any price. We're still alive. We're going to live. Then, the government and Marine will not live well. Marine headquarters. You went there and they still escaped? Sengoku was standing behind his desk, one hand on the desk, his eyebrows depressed and his face looked contorted. Aokiji's shirt was broken in a small part. He went to the side, took the teapot on the tea table and poured a cup of tea. After a sip, he sat down on the sofa and slowly said, "Ghost Hand Ross, Demon Sheriff Lafitte, Devil Child Nico Robin, Surgeon of Death Trafalgar Law, these 4 escaped." Sengoku slowly sat back in his chair, rubbed his swollen eyebrows and said, "Has everyone else been killed? I can barely explain it to the government if that's the case." Aokiji went out personally to chase the Ghost Hand Pirates and 4 most important main crew members of Ghost Hand Pirates escaped. This is undoubtedly a great headache for Sengoku. Unknowingly, the Ghost Hand Pirates has grown to this point. At the same time, the world government has also received this news and Gorosei, 5 Elder Stars, are a little shocked by the fact that the Ghost Hand Pirates has been able to escape the pursuit of a Marine Admiral. Although Florian Triangle Sea may be foggy and difficult to drive into with a large number of battleships, it undoubtedly also shows the sharpness of the Ghost Hand Pirates. What shall we do? Should we make him a shichibukai? He won't accept it, and doesn't this shows that the government is bowing to a pirate? Aokiji is up to his tricks again. How is it possible that ghost hand pirates escaped from the hand of the government highest power? Gorosei, 5 elder stars, has some headaches at this time. Former ghost hand pirates were a little nuisance for them, and now that nuisance has turned into a big headache for them. Being able to survive the pursuit of a marine admiral, the threat of the ghost hand pirates itself has gradually surpassed the threat of their small influence. We absolutely can't let them go. Continue to look for the ghost hand pirates, and once we have the opportunity to move out, we must kill him. There cannot be a fifth, Yonko, 4 emperors. The Sabaody Archipelago. This is the terminal of the first half of the Grand Line. Whichever route one takes, they will eventually converge at this island and take it as a starting point for New World in the second half. Because of this, there is endless darkness beneath the surface of this beautiful bubble group island, slave trade, Tenryubito, the wicked pirates who arrived at this island. Somewhere on the shore, a pirate ship is docked here, and several coding craftsmen are painting the pirate ship, which seems to have been completed by about 1/10. It should have just begun. On the shore, there are 5 or 6 pirates who stayed here to keep watch on the ship. They sit or stand, watching the coding craftsmen coding the ship and drinking and chatting. Suddenly, one of the people facing the sea sat upright, looked in the direction ahead and rubbed his eyes, saying, "It seems something is floating over there." Really? Several pirates next to him looked in the direction that the man was looking at. They saw a black shadow in the direction they were looking at. The black shadow turned out to be a simple raft that is spliced together by a large number of wooden boards. There are still several figures on it. It's like a man in distress, but it's really awkward, ha ha ha. That's what it looks like. I don't think they will have anything valuable. Several pirates sat on the shore grinning at each other. And as the raft drew closer, the figures on the raft became clearer and clearer. It was 4 dirty victims, with ragged clothes and hair. I say, a man who had been staring at the humble raft looked at the gradually clear figure on the raft. Suddenly, he frowned and showed a look of incredulity. He said, "Those people seem to be familiar. Look at the front one." "Ah, familiar?" A pirate next to him gave him a strange look and subconsciously glanced at the direction of the raft, and this eye also caught his gaze. The figure sitting at the front of the raft, although it looked very awkward, did give him a sense of familiarity, as if he had seen him somewhere. "Yes, I remember it. That guy looks like Ghost Hand Ross." At that moment, someone finally got an inspiration, remembered something, and suddenly stood up, showing a trace of shock, looking at the raft that was gradually approaching the shore. The people next to him were shocked when they heard the words. Ghost Hand Ross. The big pirate having a bounty of 440 million berries on his head. You're wrong. How did that character become like that? It's a little weird, but he does look like him. Could it be that they met a giant sea king? Or was it marines? Several pirates stood up and looked at the shadows on the raft, murmuring in astonishment. At that moment, one of them suddenly grabbed the gun beside him and aimed at the man on the raft, showing a tinge of nervousness and excitement. If it's the Ghost Hand Ross, we can become famous by killing a pirate who had a bounty of 400 million berries. Hey, are you crazy? A man next to him looked shocked and said to him, "That's a terrifying figure that has a bounty of over 400 million berries. We only have a captain whose bounty doesn't exceed 40 million berries. Don't make a noise, let me aim first." The pirate, who held the gun, closed one eye and made an aiming posture, revealing his evil nature. He said, "Even if it is really that Ghost Hand Ross, his appearance suggests that he has been lost on the sea for many days. He will fall down if you poke him too hard." Several others heard it, and their horror eased slightly. Looking at the motionless figures on the raft, it seemed that all 4 figures had died and their eyes sparkled. It's true, it seems that they are all starved to death, but it is safer to shoot them a few times first. Yes. Several people looked at each other, all showing a grin. They all took up firearms and artillery and aimed at the raft, which was less than 10 meters from the shore. Their faces are tinged with excitement and tension. This kind of opportunity is rare. It's just a chance for them to make them all famous in the sea. Bang! No one knows who fired first, but all others followed that shot and opened fired on the coming raft. A time-intensive bullet, together with 2 cannonballs, flew towards the tattered raft. Looking at the 4 figures on the raft, the first bullet was strangely stagnated about a meter away from the raft when it was blown up. Followed by the second and third, Even the fist-sized cannonball was silently fixed in the air when it intruded a meter into the raft, as if it had hit an invisible wall. The air seemed to be still and silent, and the atmosphere became very strange. This should be devil fruit ability. Idiot, he is not dead and he is able to use his strength. No one knows how long it took for the pirates who responded to it to finally show their horror on their faces. They are able to reach the Sabodi archipelago. Although they are not members of the supernova pirates who have a bounty of over 100 million berries, they have encountered various kinds of crises. After this event, the fear spreads up immediately and they did not dare to continue to watch as they threw away their weapons and ran away. At this time, Ross, who was sitting in front of the raft, stood up slowly. In his slightly squinting eyes, he showed an indifferent color as his right hand poked out and pressed forward. Buzz. The entire front of the air instantly showed a strange distortion form, like a shock, bursting out suddenly. Dozens of bullets and 2 cannonballs, under this force, did not explode but were crushed to pieces of iron slag. Where this power of distortion goes, the sea on the shore is instantly depressed, followed by the land on the shore. It is also like an irresistible plow passed by land, leaving behind a collapse and tunnel with a vertical width of 5 or 6 meters. Of the 6 pirates, only one barely avoided the power of distortion's straight-line impact, while the other 5 were instantaneously trapped in it, stirred together with mud, rock, and seawater. I can finally take a good rest. In order to preserve his stamina, in order to avoid the inability to resist an admiral, Ross did not use his ability to directly carry the raft to the Sabodi archipelago but only slightly push the raft, so the consumption of stamina was very small, and with the tenacious talent, this consumption of stamina was doable. He slowly retrieved his hand, stood up, looked at the Sabodi archipelago ahead and suddenly disappeared from the raft. When he reappeared, he came to the only surviving pirate. This is, the pirate, looking at his companion's fate, was already frightened and his legs were weak. He sat on the ground moving backward. He could not even see the corpses of his 5 companions, which shows the strength of this pirate with a bounty of more than 400 million berries. Not to mention him, even if his captain was here, in the face of such force, he would have no resistance. You should have a ship. Where is it? Looking at the pirate who was almost scared out, Ross asked in a gentle tone, but the pirate eventually turned pale and passed out in terror. Ross was a little dissatisfied, but when he thought that he had been floating in the sea for 7 or 8 days, his present appearance must not be handsome as before, but that of a wicked pirate, so he can understand. The ship should be. Lafitte and others went ashore and glanced at the pirate ship in the distance. The battered raft that had been scrambled up with Law's abilities was obviously impossible to use again. It would never be used again in their life. They needed a new ship to take their place temporarily. Lafitte looked at the pirate ship for 2 times and said with a crooked head, "It's about the same size as Ghost Shadow ship, but the quality is much worse. We lost our main ship. Sooner or later we have to find Marine to settle our accounts." Speaking of this, his eyes flashed with a trace of cold light. He has never eaten such a big loss, although it was Marine Admiral. But he went on Ross's boat in order to turn the world upside down. Those craftsmen are running away. Law was carrying the demon knife on his shoulder, pointing to a group of coding craftsmen who were running away and were frightened by Ross's move. This is the Sabodi archipelago, right next to Marine headquarters, and if their arrival news went too soon, Marine Admiral will come for them again. After 7 or 8 days at sea, everyone was in a bad state. Robin said in a gentle tone, "We can only blame our captain for making such a big move. It was obviously not necessary." Ross's face remained unchanged as he said, "I am still adapting to my newly gained power. My control is very weak. They will forget what happened." Lafitte laughed and walked towards the craftsmen. After a few steps, he caught up with them. The mahogany cane in his hand rotated, and a group of craftsmen stopped. Their eyes became blank as if they didn't know what had happened. Ross slowly walked towards the pirate ship and waved at Lafitte. "Let them forget about these days, and this doesn't need to be coded anymore." "Okay, Captain." Lafitte hypnotized the craftsman with an evil smile on his face, and the craftsmen lost their tools and disappeared from the shore. Robin approached the pirate ship and looked at the pirate flag above. She thought a little and said, "This is the pirate ship Azura Pirate Group, and their captain is Azura Phantom with a bounty of 40 million berries. Only 40 million berries, and they just provoked Captain. What a bold fellow." Law spoke quietly. "A year ago, pirates with a bounty of 40 million berries were in existence that was hard to deal with. but now he has absolute confidence even in dealing with 50 million berries pirates. Crack. Ross raised his hand and fired the power of distortion, instantly removing the 1/10 of the bubble film on the ship and slowly embark on the ship. We will use this ship for the time being. Ross looked at the ship briefly and said, there are two ways to get to the New World. One is through the Fisherman Island on the seafloor. The other is through the Red Line with the permission of the government, but we don't have these restrictions. He had been able to fly directly to the Sky Island with the Ghost Shadow ship for a long time with the ability of the gravity distortion. Now it is a breeze to fly a ship above the Red Line. Also, even if he wants to go to Fishman Island, he can do the same. As a result of the awakening of his distortion fruit, he can easily exclude seawater from a certain range without coating the ship. The next thing is to take a rest, take a bath, and make a good adjustment. Here Ross slightly grinned and his eyes flashed with cold light. He said, Tenryubito often appears on this island. First Heard Marine Admiral has a duty to protect them. Whoop. I was wondering if the government would invite Captain to become a Shichibukai. Listening to Ross's words, Lafitte slightly grinned, showing a grim smile, and Law gave a shrunk laugh, showing a cold expression. They won't directly find trouble with any Marine Admiral, but it doesn't mean that they can't get an Admiral into trouble and provoke them. The Marine Admiral attacked them, now they must be prepared to pay the price. On the pirate ship, Ross and others took a break to tidy up their clothes. In the evening, the rest of the pirates returned, but before boarding the ship, they whirled around and were thrown into the sea by Ross to feed the fish, including the 40 million berries pirate captain. Resting on the ship until the next day, Ross and others finally swept away the tiredness of drifting for a few days and all regained their vitality. After leaving Law to guard the ship, Ross, Robin, and Lafitte set foot on the Sabodi archipelago. Lafitte, you are free to collect intelligence, and I am going to get some new Den Den Mushi with Robin. The Ghost Shadow ship is gone, and so are all kinds of Den Den Mushi that he has worked hard to collect. If he wants to contact Kaku and others, he needs to reset some new Den Den Mushi. This is the Sabodi archipelago at the end of the first half of the Grand Line and one of the largest trading places in the sea. It is not difficult to find a place to buy Den Den Mushi. Okay, Captain. Lafitte smiled and nodded, lowering the eaves of his hat and disappearing in the other direction. Ross and Robin lowered their hats and stepped inside the Sabodi archipelago. In addition to being the largest trading place in the world, Sabodi Archipelago Island is also the backyard of Tenryubito, where the heavenly gold received by Tenryubito is usually consumed to buy slaves or interesting things like devil fruit. It's a beautiful view. Looking at the huge Yarukaman mangrove, the colorful bubbles everywhere in the street and all kinds of new transportation, Robin shows her smile. Although the external environment had little influence on her, she could accept the gloomy, terrifying place of Florian Triangle Sea or the Sabodi Archipelago, but obviously, she preferred the latter. Naturally, after all, this is the backyard of Tenryubito. Even if there are innumerable dark transactions in the dark, it needs to be clean on the surface. Ross put his hands in the pocket of his new white overcoat and responded casually. Very soon, he and Robin found a place to configure Den Den Mushi. Ross bought 4 ordinary Den Mushi, 1 image Den Mushi and 1 video Den Mushi. After getting the new Den Den Mushi, Ross dialed directly. Captain, have you replaced the Den Den Mushi? What happened? Kaku and others still don't know anything about Florian Triangle Sea. After all, there is a lot of fog. Nobody knows what happened except marine top executives and the world government. Something has happened. It's a long story. There's a chance you will hear it soon. Have you collected new intelligence these days? Ross asked quietly. Kaku responded, there's a new intelligence gathered. Supernova, strange guest, Byron with a bounty of 230 million berries appeared on the Sabodi archipelago 2 days ago. Good, you worked hard. Ross affirmed the work of Kaku and others and hung up Den Den Mushi. Even without Luffy's time, when 11 supernovas gathered on Sabodi archipelago, it was not bad to meet a supernova with a bounty of 230 million berries. Let's go. Let's go and find this unfortunate pirate supernova. After hanging up the Den Den Mushi, Ross took Robin out of the dark laneway and was looking for the strange guest, Byron with the bounty 230 million berries. He has not yet killed any pirate with a bounty of 230 million berries. If everything went as usual, then he will gain at least 90 talent proficiency points and 1 point free talent point. Once he starts beating up a Tenryubito, the government will be angry and most likely a marine admiral will come. Although Ross has the confidence to deal with an admiral, the more strength he has the better. The Sabo de Archipelago is made up of 79 Yarukuman mangroves, or 79 small islands. It is called the Group Island and its structure is extremely complicated. However, the strange guest Byron crew came here. To go to the New World, they had to coat the ship. It took a long time to coat a ship. Even Dark King Rayleigh needed 3 days and 3 nights to finish the 1000 Sunny Go coating. If it is a larger ship, it will take longer, half a day later. Ross and Robin searched for the intelligence about the strange guest pirates, and according to the intelligence, they came to the 27th island and eventually encountered them on a street. Ghost Hand, Ross, vice captain of strange guest pirates, standing beside Captain Byron, looked at Ross with gloomy eyes and said, "Are you trying to deal with this deliberate obstruction?" As the first half of the conquest, their whole crew combined offered a bounty of nearly 400 million berries. Naturally, it was impossible for Ross and Robin to retreat because they met face to face. Any supernova that conquered the first half of the Grand Line Sea can be reluctantly called the conqueror in the first half, which is quite different from those who fish in muddy waters and only had 10 or 20 million bounties on their head. Although I'd like to compete with you very much, it's very close to Marine headquarters. If you want to make trouble, how about going to the New World and doing it again? Strange guest Byron looked at Ross with a flat face. As a pirate with a bounty of 230 million berries, he naturally had his pride, but this place was not a good place to fight. Marines will arrive if there is a fight here, don't bother so much. Ross took off the white gloves he had just bought, put them in his pocket, and looked at the quiet crowd of strange guest pirates and said, "You will all be dead before Marine can come here." It seems that you really want to die here. Strange guest Byron snorted and his eyes showed murder. He didn't want to fight here, but he could not ignore Ross for his arrogant remarks. On the street, when the two sides confronted each other, the civilians fled the street in a panic. Only a few brave people, or members of some forces, were still quietly hiding in the corner. Ghost Hand Ross, Devil Child Nico Robin and strange guest pirates. Looks like it's going to be a fight. There are more than 500 million rewards on one side and almost 400 million on the other. I don't know which side will win. The Dark Observer's eyes sparkled with comments. If all the Ghost Hand pirates were present, they would undoubtedly prefer the victory of the Ghost Hand pirates, but now only Ghost Hand Ross and Devil Child Robin are present, while strange guest pirates are close to the whole staff, with more than 30 people. Just a few months ago, strange guest pirates left safely after destroying an island under the control of the Marine headquarters fleet. Whiz! At the next moment, the strange guest pirates moved. In a moment, more than 10 firearms and guns were directed at Ross and fired, while the vice captain of the strange guest pirates pulled out his sword and waved his sword energy and cut the street. At the same time, strange guest Byron gave a sudden low cry and a hammer on the ground with a strange force through the earth suddenly burst out from under Ross's feet. Ross's expressionlessly waved his hand. After his devil fruit's awakening, his powers are like a fish in the water. It's a far cry from his previous flexibility, and his ability to exert his powers felt much better than before. Bang! Almost instantaneously, the bullets and artillery were fixed in the air and then turned into pieces under the power of distortion, followed by the violent power of distortion sweeping the entire street, strangling the crowds of the strange guest pirates. As for the bizarre force under Ross's feet, he lifted his foot and stepped on it and it broke away without any effect. You have got to be kidding me. He can't be this powerful. Compared to Ross, the crowd of strange guest pirates, in front of Ross's revealed power, showed a certain degree of shock and terror. Where the power of distortion went, the whole street seems to be swept by a horizontal Ragan tornado, and the buildings and the earth all collapse inch by inch and are torn to pieces. Strange guest Byron pupils violently contracted, and before he could do anything he had already been hit by the violent power of distortions that wrapped him in it. Earth shift. Aware of the threat of death, he did not hesitate at all and gave a violent roar, arousing his devil fruit abilities and pushing his hands in a ring toward the outbreak of the power of distortion. Bang! Ross's power of distortion, under the weird force he showed, turned a sudden sharp turn from forward to downward, and suddenly entered the earth. Almost instantaneously, the ground, more than 10 meters square, was pulverized by the power of distortions, and a huge pit appeared, which reached a depth of tens of meters and penetrated the root of the spread Yarukuman mangrove in Algeria and exposed the water below. What? Looking at this scene, Ross looked a little surprised. Strange guest Byron's was in a somewhat awkward state, but he did not suffer any substantial injury. His hands were still in the push position and he slowly recovered them while coldly staring at Ross. It's a terrible power, but it doesn't hurt me. I'm a transferer who has eaten the Paramecia transfer fruit and can turn any force in any direction at will. It seems that for an unassuming person, you really do possess some skills. After a little surprise, Ross regained his calm. Meanwhile, with his right hand clenched into a fist, he punched in the direction of strange guest Byron and strange guest pirates. I have already said that this power is useless on me. Byron screamed coldly, posing his body without fear and his arms pushed forward again, launching his devil fruit ability, this time intending to completely push back Ross's power. But, when his arms touched the power of distortion, his face changed. Although Ross's second attack was similar in scope to the first one, the power contained in it is more than doubled. The air presents a strange distortion. Standing on the side, it looks like the space of the whole street is like a piece of paper, folded by bending. There is no doubt that there is an upper limit on the power that can be transferred by Byron's fruit power, and Ross's power in hitting has undoubtedly exceeded the current upper limit that he can transfer. No, this is impossible. Byron's arms supported the violent power of distortion that has struck his arms. It was as if a man was standing against a collapsed mountain. His arms were green as he tried his best to release the transfer force. The void of distortion quickly wrapped his hands and his hands instantly showed a strange folding distortion, followed by a little bit of spread that completely defeating his transfer force and wrapping himself in it, together with all the strange guests pirates in the rear. Bang! The power of distortion spread out tens of meters in the street and finally burst with a sound. There was a terrifying crack in the street. The buildings on both sides were destroyed for the most part, as if half of the streets were instantly annihilated by a laser weapon 10 meters in diameter. There are people who hide in the lane and watch in secret. They are almost wrapped up by this force. They almost came face to face with this power that left them with chills on their backs and sweat on their foreheads. This power is horrible. This is the power of Ghost Hand Ross, who had a bounty of 440 million berries. Strange guest, Byron with a bounty of 230 million berries, has been hunted and the rewards are 90 talent proficiency points, 1 free talent point. Previously, he had accumulated a lot of free talent points, but it took 1 point to activate Tenacious Talent and it took 1 point to activate Spirit Heart. Only 1 point remained after that. Now he got 1 point by killing Strange Guest Byron and he finally has 2 free talent points. Taking a glance at the fragmented street, Ross regained his gaze. Let's go. Killing the Strange Guest Pirates also reveals that he is in the Saboti archipelago. If the government and Marine are still eager to kill him, it will not take long for a Marine Admiral to come here. Robin slightly nodded and followed Ross, who was about to leave the street. But, just as they turned and walked more than 10 meters away, a voice suddenly came from the top of a nearby building. Oh, was I too late? The Strange Guest Pirates were killed and the 400 million berries reward is gone. It was a thin man in a white cloak, sitting on the top of a ruined building, holding a handful of peanuts in his hand, throwing a peanut in his mouth and shaking his head at the ruins of Strange Guest Pirates, which had been completely destroyed and whose bodies could not be found. Ross stopped and Robin stopped at the same time. Those who hid in this ruined street saw the men who appeared on the top of the broken building and were shocked. Someone thought of something and instantly showed various emotions on their faces. Could it be that guy? Ross stared at the man in a white cloak at the top of the building and slightly narrowed his eyes and said, Pirate Hunter, Wings of Sky, Fishu Ermin. For pirates or pirate hunters, almost everyone uses guns and swords. It is too rare to see someone who doesn't use guns and swords. Among the swordsmen is Hawkeye, the world's strongest swordsman. Among the guns users, there is naturally someone who is the strongest gun user in the world, and that someone is Fishu Ermin. He is one of the strongest pirate hunters alongside one-armed Carlos. Carlos died in Hawkeye's hands so he can be removed, which left Fishu Ermin as the strongest pirate hunter. Wing of the Sky, he is really him. It is said that all the pirates that he had killed were pierced by peanuts. Although he is the strongest gun user in the world, only a few people have seen his guns. When Ross read out the name of the man in the white cloak, many people in the dark breathe in. Carlos actually ranks behind Fishu Ermin. The top of a broken building. Fishu Ermin chewed peanuts, turned to Ross and said with some hatred, You've cost me 400 million berries. Ross, who had worked for a long time before as pirate hunter, has heard the name Fishu Ermin, the person who is standing on the top of pirate hunters. He looked at Fishu Ermin and said, 400 million berries should be nothing to you. You must have been quite bored to come here. Fishu Erman crooked his head and said, yeah, it's boring. It's better to change your goal, such as conquering the world. Come to my ship. Ross slightly smiled and invited Fishu Erman. He does lack a powerful gun expert on board. Huh? What did you say? Fishu Erman looked at Ross in silence and said, I know you. A bounty of 440 million berries, Ghost Hand Ross. But what about conquering the world? Are you crazy? As he spoke, he pinched a peanut and shot it towards Ross. Sneer. This ordinary peanut, at the moment he pops it up, presents a very weird superposition of speed. In a moment, it surpasses the speed of sound by more than double. Speed means power. In front of such speed, even a peanut grain has terrible lethality. Buzz. After his devil fruit awakened, the power of distortion can be aroused by Ross's thoughts. At the rate of the explosion, the peanut invaded the 3-foot area in front of him, then slowed down abruptly, moved forward inch by inch, and was finally crushed to powder. Fishu Erman looked at the scene and was surprised and said, it seems that I underestimated you, but even if you have such strength, conquering the sea or something, your goal is still too impractical. Well, your bounty must be more than 440 million next time and I won't be fighting with you. Fishu Erman dropped another peanut into his mouth and disappeared in a flash. A few seconds after he disappeared, Robin looked at the direction in which he disappeared and said with grave eyes, he is fast. He is indeed very fast, but it's not his own speed, it should be his devil fruit ability. Ross nodded, thinking a little bit. He can instantly accelerate the peanuts to that extent. If not mistaken, it should be Paramecia speed fruit. There are many devil fruits of the time branch. In Ross's memory, there are slow devil fruit, retrogressive devil fruit and so on. This speed devil fruit should correspond to slow fruits. One is slow devil fruit and the other is speed devil fruit. And just now on that peanut, he also attached to a strong enough armament hockey. The penetration power of that peanut must be very strong. Even if he can't beat a Marine Admiral, his power level should be similar to mine. It's hard to tell who wins or loses without fighting. Ross judged Fishu Erman's strength in his mind. It was too late for him to raise his arm to resist the speed of the peanut grain just now, but after the awakening of distortion fruit, his whole body could activate the power of distortion and form a wall of distortion. Without breaking the wall of distortion, no one could do any serious harm to him. Even if it can be pierced, it will be slowed down, so that he has enough time to avoid, such as the peanut just now. This is also the reason he could finally escape under Aokiji's pursuit, otherwise, he would have been caught by him. My speed is still slower, Ross murmured, and his mind evoked the interface of the talent system. After distortion fruit awakened, although the power of distortion has improved a lot and he was able to release it outside of his body and into the air, the burden on his body is reduced a little and the devil fruit power and his physical body are once again in equilibrium, so there is no need to fill the physical enhancement. After thinking about it, Ross put 40 proficiency points to the agility enhancement. Agility enhancement. 260, top level strengthening. Physical enhancement. 400, top level strengthening. Spirit heart. 0, basic level strengthening. Tenacious. 50, mid-level strengthening. After putting 40 points in agility, the distance between his body speed and Aokiji is much closer, and even if it is still not comparable, he will not fall into too great a disadvantage in the frontal combat. As for the remaining 50 proficiency points, Ross hesitated for a while. Now distortion fruit has reached 510 points of proficiency and has reached a balance with his body. If it continues to go up, the scores will be allocated to distortion fruit and physical enhancement, respectively, with little improvement. By contrast, if he put the 50 proficiency points on observation hockey, armament hockey, or tenacious, spirit heart of general department, he can make it break through the current stage, upgrade to mid-level or high-level strengthening and achieve a huge single improvement. Thinking about it, Ross suddenly thought of something and immediately made a decision to put 50 proficiency points to the observation hockey. Buzz. The golden light flashed, and the bottle's talent interface changed for a while and finally stopped. Firearms shooting. 50 close combat fighting, 100. Distortion fruit. 510 Soru of Marines Rokushiki, 0. Kami-e, paper drawing, of Marines Rokushiki, 0. Marines Rokushiki's Geppo, moonwalk, 0. Observation hockey. 100 armament hockey. 50 as the data is frozen. Ross clearly feels that his observation hockey's range of perceptions has increased by a large margin, and the details that can be captured have also increased by a large margin. In the previous encounter with Aokiji, in the state of activating spirit heart, he concentrates and makes full use of Kenbenshoku, observation, to capture Aokiji's full speed movement. If he encounters Kizaru, his Kenbenshoku, observation, is obviously not good. Here is the Sabo-di archipelago. The possibility of encountering Kizaru is not small, with the 50 proficiency points to Kenbenshoku, observation, and 40 proficiency points to agility enhancement. He can now keep up with Aokiji in speed, and he can react and rely on the power of distortion while facing Kizaru. Robin, inform Lafitte to go back to the ship and you also go back. Marine Admiral has a good chance of arriving quickly. If it comes to Kizaru, he is not afraid, but it is not so easy to protect Robin and others. Lafitte and Robin and others are weak in strength after all. As for himself, he doesn't mind playing a game of tricks with an admiral. It would be even better if he could kill a few Tenryubitos on the way and make the government and Marine's top leaders jump like thunder. Now, he is not a small person who can be easily manipulated by the world government and Marine. At the same time, Marine headquarters. In the top office, Sengoku was standing in the middle of the room, frowning slightly at his subordinates' reports just as Kizaru, dressed in a justice cloak, came in. Looking at Kizaru coming in, Sengoku nodded at him slightly and said, Ghost Hand Ross appeared on the Sabo-di archipelago, killing strange guest Byron, one of the supernovas. The man who is defined as a wicked criminal is constantly killing pirates. Kizaru went to the tea table, poured a cup of tea, sipped it, and answered in a long tone. Sengoku's face darkened instantly, but Kizaru's statement was true. Although those pirates can indeed be sentenced to death, they have been deprived of their lives without legal trials. It is a contempt for the government and he is still a wicked criminal. That's true. Now that he's on the Sabo-di archipelago, we can't sit back and ignore him. Otherwise, the government will condemn us again. I'll go there. Kizaru took another sip of tea, stood up and walked outside. To let him deal with Yonko, 4 emperors, he must be dragged and dropped at that point, but to deal with the existence other than Yonko, 4 emperors, it is a casual run for him. Grasping nature is merit and there is no loss in catching it, not to mention that Ross and others can escape from Aokiji's hands doesn't mean that they will be able to escape from his hands. At least in terms of speed, he's much faster than Aokiji. Island number 47. About a dozen people were slowly passing by the edge of the street and did not attract anyone's attention. Even the ordinary people who noticed these people immediately regained their gaze. Many of the dozen or so people have a circular smiling face sign on their shoulders or behind their backs, which is the symbol of one of the 7 warlords of the sea, Doflamingo. Walking for a while, more than a dozen people met a black man who had been waiting here in a dark corner. Did you bring it? Among the people from the Don Quixote family, the leader Gladius walked forward and asked the black man. The black man stood up and said, How can the boss give me something so important to carry with me? I'm just here to connect with you and take you to our designated trading place. Huh, you are really cautious, Gladius snorted. The black man laughed and said, After all, you are the famous Don Quixote family. We are just small-time people. We naturally have to be on guard. Did you bring all the money with you? Gladius stared at the black man for 2 flickers and waved. Several Don Quixote family members behind him stepped forward and opened the suitcase, which was densely packed with berries of the largest denomination. Looking at berries in the box, the black man swallowed his saliva and said to Gladius, The deal was 400 million berries and 500 million worth of ammunition, but I only see berries here. Gladius's face remained unchanged. Arms can't be traded here all at once. You can take us to the trading place, don't play any tricks. Come on. The black man smiled and said, Our boss has prepared things for you. Under the leadership of the black man, Gladius and others took up the loaded berries and left the dark alleyway and headed for a shore dock. Just before they left, a shadow in a cloak suddenly appeared in the dark street. He gently lifted the cloak and looked in the direction of Gladius and others' departure, with a slightly weird smile on his face. Whoop, Don Quixote family, the next force to deal with, what on earth is such a large deal? Just as Lafitte was about to follow him, the Den Den Mushi in his pocket suddenly sounded. He connected Den Den Mushi and on the other side came Robin's voice calling him back to the ship to assemble. Well, I know, but I found something interesting here. A big deal for Don Quixote family could have an unexpected payoff for us. After a moment of silence on the other side of Den Den Mushi, Robin relayed Ross's message. Captain says you can move freely and be safe. All right. Lafitte raised a strange curve at his mouth, put the Den Den Mushi in his pocket, turned into a dark shadow and quietly followed Gladius and others. Gladius and others moved more and more remote towards the outskirts of the island, but Lafitte's concealment and tracking abilities were beyond doubt, and even so, he can still easily follow them, without anyone noticing. Finally, Gladius and the members of Don Quixote family came to a shore of the Sabodi archipelago, where a medium-sized ship was parked alone on this remote shore. Boss, the people of Don Quixote family are here. The leading black man came to the side of the ship and shouted at the ship. Then they heard footsteps sound coming from the ship. Soon a man with a captain cap and a brown beard came down with 20 men and a wooden box in his hand. Gladius glanced at the wooden box in the captain's hand, waved to his subordinates and asked them to open it again, and revealed a large number of berries in it. Well, 400 million berries. The brown-bearded captain looked at the box of berries, his eyes flashing with greed and a smile on his face. He slowly opened the box in front of him. In the dilapidated wooden box, there is a devil fruit, which has a big difference from zone and paramecia. The whole body is khaki in color and the surface looks like sand. Logia, sand fruit. Nearly 2 years after the death of the sand crocodile, this Logia devil fruit finally appeared on the sea again. Don Quixote family trades in the dark world, all over the sea. After Ace's death, they found his devil fruit, so it is not surprising that they will be able to find other devil fruits. This is Logia's sand devil fruit. Gladius looked at the exquisite devil fruit, and his eyes flashed. Although he had already eaten Paramecia's explosion fruit, but for this 900 million Logia sand fruit, he still showed a serious and solemn look. With this devil fruit, Don Quixote family can easily cultivate a cadre or even a top cadre and expand its influence. Then, close the deal. Gladius took a deep breath and signaled his men to deliver the money, while at the same time he reached for the devil fruit in the wooden box. Whether the next step is to turn the tables directly, overturn the deal and recapture the berries, or just complete the deal, this fruit is the most important. He has to get his hands on it. However, just as Gladius was grabbing at the sand fruit, a thumb-sized cylindrical object suddenly flew over from a distance and landed in the field. Bang! Before it fell, it burst apart abruptly, instantly turning into a mass of fog and instantly covering the area of tens of meters squared. The brown-bearded captain was shocked. Subconsciously, he had to retrieve the wooden box in his hand. Gladius looked very mad when he saw it. He stepped forward and grabbed it. But, just as his finger was about to touch the wooden box, a mahogany cane popped out of the mist, banged the wooden box in the brown-beard's hand out, and knocked on the back of his hand. Gladius had a pain in the back of his hand and a flash of anger in his eyes. Who dared to intervene in their Don Quixote family deal? In anger, Gladius did not retreat, and his fingers shook, throwing a bunch of explosive projectiles in the direction of the mahogany cane, enveloping the area. Bang! 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 The violent explosion in the field blew and instantly dispersed the diffuse smoke, which was also mixed with the screams of the accidentally injured men. But Gladius could not care so much. The sand fruit must not be robbed. While the after effects of the explosion were still continuing, Gladius jumped through the smoke and charged towards the wooden box and picked it up with his right hand. Dare to destroy Don Quixote family's business. Grabbing the wooden box in his hand, Gladius regained his indifference and snorted coldly and looked down at the area which he had blown up. When the mist cleared, there was no shadow in the area, only one cherry petal. He is quick to escape. Gladius looked slowly at the wooden box in his hand and opened it slowly. But the moment the box opened, the expression on his face became stiff. The box was empty, and devil fruit had disappeared, replaced by 3 pink cherry petals, echoing the flock of petals on the ground, as if laughing at him for being an idiot. Damn it! Damn it! Who is it? Who is it? Gladius's face was blue and green as he gritted his teeth, his face showing sorrow and anger, and he was about to launch his devil fruit ability to blow up the area, but no matter how he looked, he couldn't see any traces anymore. The only thing that impressed upon him was the mahogany cane, the one hidden in the fog, and the only shadow of his figure. Sabo de Archipelago Ross doesn't know anything about Lafitte, but he's going to go against Don Quixote family sooner or later. It's easy to do it one step ahead of time. What's more, the deal Lafitte found may be something of high value, such as one of the great grade swords. Ross no longer needs to use his fist to stimulate the power of distortion after awakening his fruit power. He can easily concentrate the power of distortions on weapons such as swords, and then throw them out, just like Whitebeard's shock ability. If he could get a good sword, then it will be even better for him. After letting Robin and Lafitte return to the ship first, Ross searched for a person's existence on the island according to his memory: Roger Pirate's vice captain, Dark King Rayleigh. Dark King Rayleigh's hanging bounty is as high as 2 billion berries, but now Ross cannot defeat Rayleigh and will be beaten by him. He also has no plans of self-abuse. The reason why he intends to find Rayleigh is to see whether he can get some useful information from Rayleigh's mouth. Ross knows a lot of secrets from his memory, but there are more things that he doesn't know. Compared to him, Rayleigh knows a lot more, and a lot of information has a great effect. Unfortunately, after searching 4 or 5 islands, he could not find any trace of Rayleigh, and a lot of time has been passed, and a Marine Admiral will be coming here soon. Time to go. Ross didn't mind fighting Marine Admiral, but he didn't plan to fight Admiral in the Sabaody archipelago. First of all, he certainly couldn't fight. Second, even if he could, what about another Admiral? Marine headquarters is right next to Sabaody archipelago. And just as Ross turned around, judged the direction, and began to return, there was a strange silence on the road ahead. Immediately afterward, he saw that in the distant streets, pedestrians stopped, like dominoes, kneeling down one by one and bowing to the ground as if to welcome the Emperor. In the silence, everyone dared not breathe. At the end of the street, a man with bubbles on his head was sitting on the back of a slave, who crawled hard on the ground on all fours. World noble, Tenryubito. The descendants of the kings who founded the world government 800 years ago have the supreme privilege, and all laws do not hold true for them, and any offensive act will be regarded as a death penalty that can be killed on the spot. There is nothing fun today. Saint Charles rode slowly on his slave and yawned, showing a silly look. Several subordinates beside him followed respectfully and did not dare to answer at will. At this moment, he casually skipped and saw a young girl kneeling on the left side. His eyes flashed and his head looked at her for a second. "It looks pretty good. Let's choose her as the wife of my new house." "Yes." The subordinate next to him immediately responded respectfully and said, "Go and handle the procedure for welcoming Mrs. 21 to Holy Land Marijoy right away." At the same time, several subordinates with indifferent faces approached the girl on her knees, ignoring her panic expression, and seized her. The people next to them saw this scene. All of them were full of horror, but no one dared to say anything. They were all sweating, kneeling on the ground. The whole street, except for the girl's panic and crying, is dead silence. It is a death sentence to commit a crime against Tenryubito. Offending a Tenryubito will directly invite a Marine Admiral on their head. The Sabaody archipelago is the back garden of Tenryubito. Nobody dares to offend Tenryubito here. Even the wicked pirate and supernova in the first half of Grand Line who sailed here are all unanimous in their choice and tolerance when facing Tenryubito. As for those who have not yielded, they have fallen under the hands of Marine Admiral, paying the price for their actions, and writing a bloody warning for later generations. No one dares to speak. No one dares to do anything. Everyone watched as Tenryubito's guards grabbed the girl and slowly moved on. Some of the people who knew the girl gritted their teeth and their hearts were filled with grief. What was the point of their existence? But no one dares to stand up even if they are angry. Despite the azure blue sky, the threats of Tenryubito and the world government, as well as Marine Admiral, seem like a mountain of black clouds, which are pressing against the sky, making it difficult for everyone to breathe. However, in this silent repression, Tenryubito, sitting on a slave, suddenly flashed a glance of anger and looked ahead at the street. "Hey, that fellow, don't you want to live? How dare you stand there?" In front of a kneeling street, there is a figure standing there. Standing is only the most common posture, but here, in front of Tenryubito, it is extremely rare. The people there, listening to the sound of Tenryubito's anger, looked up in horror and at the figure standing in front of the street. At this time, someone dared to stand? Humanity. Ross looked at St. Charles with indifferent eyes. His voice was calm and gentle. He said, "How can you kneel down to the garbage?" On a quiet street, Ross's voice echoed clearly, and all the people who were kneeling there were all horrified and their eyes were wide open. Who is this guy? Didn't he know what would happen if he said that? St. Charles was there, and it was the first time he had ever heard someone dared to say such a thing in front of him. In a moment of anger, his ugly face was completely deformed, his angry teeth were gnashed, his breath was aroused, and his hands were pinched dead. Bastard. Seeing Tenryubito shivering and unable to speak clearly, the guards and attendants next to him were somewhat shocked. One of them shouted at Ross. Do you know what you said? Do you know who he is? Hurry and kneel down and pray for forgiveness. While squatting, several guards stepped forward. But before they came to Ross, a strange force suddenly came and crushed several people's bodies into the street in an instant. Together with the area several meters square, it collapsed suddenly and a huge pit appeared. See this scene. Many people kneeling on both sides of the street are showing some surprise. He dares to offend Tenryubito. He is indeed not an ordinary person. He is pirate, captain of Ghost Hand Pirates, Ghost Hand Ross. Some people looked at Ross and recognized his identity. His eyes were slightly widened as no one thought that there would be a pirate standing up at this time. No, it should be said that he never knelt down from the beginning. He's not afraid of Marine Admiral. If you offend Tenryubito, you'll attract Marine Admiral. Many people were in a trance, and once again there was depression in their hearts. A pirate stood up and provoked Tenryubito, but what about that? In the past, pirates have provoked Tenryubito, but they have been overwhelmed by Marine Admiral. If the privileges and identities of Tenryubito are the sources of their inner grief, then the existence of Marine Admiral is like the heavy black clouds in the sky. That will never fade, the dark cloud of despair. You damn bitch, dare to. St. Charles watched Ross slap his subordinate's bodyguard and press them to the ground, disappearing without a trace, and he finally responded. In addition to the anger in his heart, he couldn't help but feel a trace of fear. This person is not an ordinary untouchable, but a daring madman who dares to offend him. It's the captain of Ghost Hand Pirates, Ghost Hand Ross. Standing behind him, the attendant recognized Ross, and a cold sweat overflowed on his forehead. A pirate who has a bounty of 440 million berries on his head is not someone they could deal with. St. Charles gritted his teeth, with a touch of anger and ferocity on his face, and roared, "So what? Call Marine Admiral over to me. This pirate is mad at this level. What are the Marines' wastes doing?" Listening to the angry roar of St. Charles, the attendant behind him nodded sweatily. This situation needs to be notified at the Marine headquarters for a Marine Admiral to come over. But before they dialed emergency Den Mushi, a strange force suddenly spread from the end of the street. This force is perfectly controlled, roaring through the middle of the street without touching the kneeling people on both sides of the street and binds all of them. I'm sorry. Marine Admiral or something, I've seen it once. Ross looked at Tenryubito and his men indifferently. With a swing of his outstretched hand, Ross crushed all the attendants and guards who tried to stand in front of Tenryubito and plunged them into the earth. St. Charles saw this scene and at last, there was a look of panic on his face. He fell down from the slave and looked panic-stricken. However, it was precisely because he fell and sat down that he saw the slaves he was riding on. As if he had caught a life-saving straw, he twitched the chain in his hand and pulled the explosion ring on the slave's neck. He panicked and said, "Quick, hurry up and block him." However, the slave did not respond. Instead, he looked at Ross, who was coming slowly, and grinned, with an expression of relief. From the man's eyes in front of him, he clearly saw the kind of look that would never be touched by anything outside. It was the eyes of the strong. "You useless thing, useless." St. Charles kicked the slave with his foot, but the slave turned his head and looked at him with a pair of bloodshot eyes, and his heart trembled. Bang! A sound blew and the explosion ring on the slave's neck burst and fell into a pool of blood. Ross's eyes swept over the slave and did not stop too much and once again fell on St. Charles. His figure shook and then he appeared silently in front of St. Charles. You, untouchable, what do you want to do?" St. Charles had a look of panic on his face, eyes wide, and a fear of death lingering in his mind as he watched Ross close by. He never thought about death in his life. He is world noble Tenryubito. Even if he offends a Marine Admiral, he would not say anything to him, let alone kill him. Is this man mad? But, no matter how horrified and fearful he was, Ross's eyes remained unchanged as he raised his feet calmly and stepping down at his feet. Almost at this time, a golden light shining in the sky, like a round of the sun came. In the golden light, a figure rushed toward this location at his fastest speed. But, it was too late. When the golden light finally arrived, Ross's feet also fell. The power of distortion was instantly agitated, and St. Charles's body, together with the ground more than 10 meters below, was shattered and eventually buried in the sea through Yarukam and Mangrove's roots. Kazaru, who was able to arrive, looked at the scene. His wretched face showed unprecedented vibration. Ross actually killed a Tenryubido. He never expected to encounter such a thing. Not to mention killing a Tenryubido. Even if one Tenryubido was offended, it was a crime of death. It needed Marine Admiral to be dispatched and maintained, and now a Tenryubido was killed, and he was killed in the Sabodi archipelago. Not to mention him, even the government in Gorosei, 5 elder stars, have to bear the great pressure brought by the Tenryubido community. The audience was silent. Not even Kizaru had thought of it, let alone the people kneeling on both sides of the street. They all looked incredibly at the huge hole where Tenryubido had disappeared. Unlike Kizaru's emotions, this scene falls into their eyes like a faint light, tearing apart the dark clouds that oppress the whole world. Tenryubido are not gods. Tenryubido can die too. In dead silence, Kizaru slowly spoke. After all, he was a Marine Admiral who had experienced countless incidents and countless battles and soon recovered from the shock of his heart. In this case, this is very bad. Kizaru stared at Ross, narrowed his eyes a little, and said, "Ghost Hand Ross, do you know what you've done? I had some doubts about you being similar to that dangerous old man, but now you look like." At this point, his tone stopped and he did not go on talking, while the half-sentence he had pressed down was, like Revolutionary Army leader Dragon. "It's not Aokiji." Ross turned slowly and looked at Kizaru. He was not surprised by Kizaru's arrival, because it was very close to Marine headquarters, and Kizaru would be the fastest person to arrive from headquarters. And Aokiji chased him in Florian Triangle C for several days before he was finally shaken off by him. Although Florian Triangle C is foggy, it is an indisputable fact that he failed to catch him. It is also a surprise for Kizaru to deal with him. Ross looked at Kizaru indifferently and said, "You can only blame yourself for being late. It's a real headache now. I originally came here in a relaxed mood." Kizaru recovered a little bit of trivial tone, but still with a trace of depression. It doesn't matter whether he catches Ross or not before. He doesn't really care about it, he just wanted to try. But now a Tenryubido died in Ross's hands and he was killed on the Sabodi archipelago. If he did not catch Ross, he would not be able to explain to the government and Tenryubido. Originally ambiguous, it has become necessary to defeat Ross, which makes Kizaru, who has always been lazy, very angry. Marine Admiral, Kizaru. People on both sides of the street were also paying attention to Kizaru at this time. As the residents of Sabodi archipelago, they all knew the Marine's 3 admirals. Someone's voice trembled slightly and pronounced Kizaru's identity and code. "Why don't anyone dare to offend Tenryubido, even ordinary pirates? It's because offending a Tenryubido will bring down a Marine Admiral? Without Marine Admiral's protection, Tenryubido would have long been tortured and killed by angry people. Why would they dare to overrule the world? Can you survive, Ghost Hand Ross, ignoring the privileges conferred by the world government and the heavenly world government? A Tenryubido was killed here. A Tenryubido who made everyone feel bitter and hateful. Whatever Ross's identity, a pirate or revolutionary army, in the hearts of all, has become a ray of dawn piercing black clouds, but this ray of dawn, now encountering a huge crisis, that is, Marine Admiral, representing the black clouds that oppress the whole sky. Because Tenryubido is dead, there is no need to continue kneeling. Standing up is not against the law. Many people began to quietly retreat, and a large number of Marine began to surround the area. This is the Marine Admiral that upholds justice. It's ridiculous. On the way back, many people were looking at Kizaru. They didn't know who had lowered their voice. They mocked him with a voice that only they could hear. However, this sentence, however, is so clear that it goes into the ear of Kizaru, who expanded observation haki to prevent Ross from escaping, and this sentence made his face more gloomy. Tenryubido's running dog. The so-called justice is to bully us for Tenryubido. A sentence, from the mouth of the people, uttered with a very low voice, except for themselves. Even the people next to them could not understand. But this sentence, all of them have clearly entered Kizaru's ears. Ghost Hand, Ross. Kizaru's face looked ugly and he wasn't going to waste any more time. He stared at Ross, and with a sudden twinkle, he came near Ross and kicked him horizontally. He had originally planned to tease Ross by asking him if he had been kicked by the speed of light. Now he is not interested. His only purpose is to defeat Ross and send him to trial as soon as possible. Buzz. When Kizaru's foot came 2 feet away from Ross, Ross could hardly keep up with him until he reached the distance of 2 feet, but strangely, his foot slowed down sharply and turned into a shining golden light. Ross's movements were slow in Kizaru's eyes, but he was also blocked by Ross's power of distortion, and finally, Ross's arm was raised and blocked in front of his leg. Bang! Ross's arm blocked Kizaru's foot, but he still collapsed and flew out, knocking down 2 buildings in a row before stopping. You don't seem to be as fast as you think, Kizaru. Ross landed on a clearing. Despite flying upside down and smashing 2 buildings, he was not injured. The impact was completely blocked by the walls of distortion. His current strength is no match for Kizaru, but he will not be injured by Kizaru. After his devil fruit awakened, the gap between him and Admiral is still there, but it is not huge like before. Would you please hold your hand? Kizaru's voice came from a distance but suddenly came behind Ross the next moment. He kicked Ross with 1 foot again and said, "And let me explain to Tenryubito." Bang! Ross's observation hockey captured Kizaru's action. He was too close to react, but now it's enough to turn around, and he once again blocked Kizaru's attack. After 2 brief encounters with Kizaru, Ross realized a point clearly. Kizaru's speed is faster than Aokiji's, but it's not the speed of light, and it's far from the speed of light. As expected, Ross's eyes were calm. He had guessed that Kizaru's speed is probably the upper limit of human consciousness. Now it seems that it should be the case now. Kizaru's fruit speed limit is the speed of light, but his nerve response can't reach the speed of light. To attack, the idea of attacking is necessary before the body can implement it. How can the human mind reach the level of light speed, complete a series of control over the body in an instant and move a long distance and kick it out? Therefore, Kizaru's speed limit is his reaction speed, which is also the limit of human neural response. Distortion impact. Ross, who was kicked again by Kizaru for the second time, used the gravity distortion. The direction in which he flew turned into a parabola from backward, slanting to the sky, and punching Kizaru at the same time. Kizaru stood on the ground, his slender legs kicked out violently and attacked Ross from afar. A bright golden light suddenly burst out and collided with the invisible power of distortions in the air. ZZ. The golden light penetrated Ross's power of distortion and came to Ross, but there was only a little light left, and it exploded. Ross's hands were empty, and the aftermath of the explosion was contained in his palm as it was stopped in the palm of his hand. He then turned sharply and pressed toward the void behind him. Almost at this moment, Kizaru appeared in Ross's back and kicked him. Bang! There was an earth-shaking explosion in the sky, and the bright golden light instantly shone on the nearby streets, affecting the whole island and making countless people look up to the sky in horror. Look, what is that? The golden light dissipated and there were 2 suspended figures in the sky. One was Ross and the other was Kizaru. Ross was slightly confused, while Kizaru was somewhat calm. Almost at this time, Ross blinked and sipped low. Distortion. Sonic explosion. Aokiji has suffered from this tactic under his command, but he may not tell Kizaru about it. Ross is not stingy with his tactics. He is now fighting against a Marine Admiral, and only by using the sonic explosion technique can he achieve some results. As for light explosion, it is mostly ineffective for Kizaru, whose body is light. In the case of light distortion, an alternative fruit ability can't compete with a single fruit for light control, just as it can't compete with sand fruit's ability to control sand. Buzz. Sure enough, Kizaru didn't know Ross had this trick. In an instant, his ears were buzzing and his head was swooning. Without hesitation, Ross rushed towards Kizaru, wrapped in the power of distortion, and smashed Kizaru in the head. Bang! Kizaru's ears are fiercely buzzing. His mind is dizzy and he can't make a dodge action. In a hurry, he can only wave his arms and display armament hockey to fight. Ross hit Kizaru with a punch bang, which shocked his arm instantly. He also sank sharply, but rather than falling down weirdly, he was sucked into the air by Ross' gravity distribution's ability. Knee hit, swing, sweep, cross kick. Utilizing Kizaru's current weakness, Ross quickly attacked him from all directions, and because Kizaru was unable to use his speed to avoid him, he had to face Ross's attacks directly in close combat, and little by little Kizaru was beaten. After a series of attacks by Ross, Kizaru, who was severely affected by the sonic explosion, could only fight in an awkward fashion. Because he relied too much on his devil fruits, once he was affected, he could not play the advantage of the speed and he sucked at close combat fighting. Ross broke up his rack 3 or 5 times and smashed his chest and belly with a knee bump. Puff. Even with armament hockey, it's impossible to take Ross's knee bump without receiving any damage. Kizaru sprayed blood in an instant and felt a fall between his chest and belly. You see this, right? The people were shocked to see Ross killing Tenryubito, and they were stunned when they saw the fight between him and an admiral. What did they see? Marine Headquarters Admiral Kizaru was hammered by Ghost Hand Ross, and he is still vomiting blood. Distortion Hammer. Ross noticed that Kizaru had almost recovered after the knee impact. His hands were hammered together and he hit Kizaru with a sharp hammer. Kizaru's arms crossed over his head and he waved, but he was still turned into a golden light as he was hit by Ross and dropped to the ground below. Bang! A sound came from the ground and the golden light burst, smashing several buildings. After hammering Kizaru from the sky, Ross did not hesitate at all. The light distortion and distortion sounds started at the same time as he disappeared silently from the sky and he appeared in the distance. Hello Kizaru. Goodbye Kizaru. Cough. Cough. In a burst of golden light, Kizaru recovered his form and he coughed violently and his mouth was still overflowing with a trace of blood. He was completely angry. Even if he dealt with Yonko, 4 emperors, he had never suffered such a loss. Sensing that Ross had escaped, Kizaru had an angry look on his face and he suddenly turned into a golden light and rushed into the sky. Do you want to leave after doing such a bad wicked thing? Whiz. Whiz. Kizaru was so fast that even though Ross had flown far ahead of him, he was still catching up quickly, but Ross was not afraid as he pulled out his named sword Happy Spring from his waist and attacked towards Kizaru's direction. Sword of Distortion. Above the blade, there is a power of distortion visible to the naked eye. Then under Ross's sword, it bursts out in a sudden linear burst and cuts diagonally towards Kizaru. Kizaru's body turned a little golden light, and his hands shook. A golden sword was formed and waved at Ross. Ama no Murakumo, Sword of the Gathering Clouds of Heaven. Bang! The power of distortion collided with the laser in the air and exploded violently again. Ross faces Kizaru while holding the Happy Spring in both hands and slamming it towards Kizaru, while he continues to retreat under the power of gravity distortion and Geppo, Moonwalk. Kizaru flickered in a series of crisscrossing dexterity choppers and eventually came to Ross by virtue of his fruit power and Haki's ability to break through Ross's obstruction. The golden sky fell sharply from the clouds and swords, colliding with Happy Spring in Ross's hand. After a second of freezing in the air, Ross's power of distortion collapsed and the whole person fell downward. In midair, Ross turned sideways. Whiz! Kizaru turned into golden light to catch up with him and kicked hard. Ross hit him with a backhand punch. In the collision between the fists and kicks, Ross once again flew out and was in midair. He used the gravity distortion to shift direction and continued to fly toward the coast while holding the Happy Spring in his right hand. Yasukani no Magatama, Kama Jewel of Age Shaku. Kizaru, facing Ross's successive chopping, closed his hands in front of him, shot the Sky Cluster Cloud Sword into golden photons and disappeared. At the same time, his arms crisscrossed, fantasizing countless lasers, and sprayed at Ross. Bang! 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 The Yasukani no Magatama, Kama Jewel of Age Shaku, directly included all the large areas in the attack range. Every laser fell on the earth and a sound broke out like heavy artillery. During the continuous bombing, Ross's figure was slightly awkward and rushed out of the smoke. His swords were in front of him, and his shoulder and leg clothes were damaged. Distortion Strike. With both hands clasping Happy Spring, Ross slammed his sword. The power of distortion of this sword is directly in the form of a wide-scale attack, like an invisible dragon tornado, where the void seems to be distortion. Whiz! Whiz! Instead of hitting Ross hard, Kizaru made a quick ascent with speed, avoiding Ross's trick, pausing for a moment in midair and then turning to dive again. They ran after each other and soon hit the shore all the way. Kizaru is here. Get ready. Lafitte had returned to the ship and by this time the battle between Ross and Kizaru had already been noticed. As the golden light and Ross approached, they all held their breath. Whiz! Just as Ross arrived on the coast and Kizaru was within the reach of Robin's flower fruit. Hana no mi. Robin resolutely put out her hand and crossed her arms in front of her. Trying to fleur. Clutch. 30 flower. Clutch. Flower fruit. Hana no mi. Is the ability to visualize arms directly on all objects within a certain range. Although Kizaru is fast enough, the launching of flower fruit. Hana no mi. Ignores the moving speed of objects. Bang! Kizaru's body instantly collapsed into a golden light and although he could breathe enough to regain his original shape, the wrinkles on his face became a little more. In the match with Aokiji, Robin was frozen in the ice without doing anything, but the battle still made her armament haki grow by a lot, although still weak, and it cannot cause any substantial damage to Kizaru. But it can still affect him. Room. Just when Robin interfered with Kizaru, Law also launched his ability. The translucent cover instantly expanded and Ross was enveloped in the cover, followed by a finger. Whoosh! Ross's figure disappeared in the sky, and when he reappeared, he came to the ship, and in the previous original location of Ross appeared a bomb made by Lafitte. Kizaru was still kicking sideways, and the bomb exploded in front of him. "You don't have to send us away, Kizaru, we shall meet soon." Ross waved to Kizaru, and power of distortion started. The bottom of the ship splashed a huge wave and the whole ship crashed and sank into the sea. In the face of Aokiji, it is almost useless to flee into the sea. The other party can freeze the sea in an instant, or even chase down all the way, so he can only flee up. In the face of Kizaru, on the contrary, he can't run up to the sky as he will be killed. It is the right way to flee to the bottom of the sea. Glint Glint fruit can't get to the sea, nor can it freeze the sea. Kizaru turned into a golden light and rushed out of the explosion. It was also unexpected that Ross had sunk into the sea with his ship in an instant, which was totally beyond his expectation. First of all, the ship was not coated. Second, Ross used the power of distortion to sink the ship into the sea, which was much faster than anything else. With the interference of Robin, Law, and Lafitte, he could not stop them for the first time. He is not Aokiji, he can't freeze the sea. Yasukani no Magatama, Jewel of Age Shaku. Looking at the vast sea, Kizaru's face was covered with wrinkles and his eyebrows were all crowded together. He could not help but cross his arms and launch a wide-ranging attack against the power of the sea, trying to get Ross and others out of the sea bank. He attacked close to half a minute and almost boiled the nearby seawater, but he never saw any traces of ghost hand pirates. The ability to enter the sea is a dead end, but Ross is not an idiot and a fool. Since he chose to sink into the sea, he definitely has a way to survive under the sea. Finally, Kizaru turned into a golden light and returned to the shore, looking at the sea, his face showing unprecedented distress. He did not do anything this time. He couldn't stop Ross from killing Tenryubito, didn't capture Ross, and the crew of the ghost hand pirates escaped. Now, I really can't explain this. In the sea, Kizaru's Yasukani no Magatama, Jewel of Age Shaku, fired at the sea and it covered a wide range of underwater areas, but his attack was not hitting any coated ship or submarine, but a ship under the maximum escort of Ross's distortion wall. Although the lasers could penetrate Ross's destruction wall, their speed and power were greatly slowed down and no serious damage could be caused to the hull. The ship sank diagonally all the way down, and soon Kizaru's laser was no longer visible. That is Marine Admiral Kizaru, Logia Glint Glint fruit. These Marine Admirals really eat some good things. When Law saw that the laser had disappeared, he was completely safe and pushed the demon knife into its scabbard. Robin stood in front of the deck guardrail, looked up at the sea above her and after a while retracted her eyes, saying, "He is extremely fast, similar to that Wings of Sky, I could hardly catch his movements." There is still a difference. Ross also pushed the happy spring to its scabbard around his waist and shrank the area of the distortion wall around the ship to slow down his stamina consumption, while his eyes flashed. Glint Glint fruit gives an unrestricted body with limited response speed. Speed fruit's acceleration ability ignores the optic nerve response speed, but the body can't be elementalized. One is limited by the speed of reaction, the other is limited by the body's ability to withstand its power. In general, there are certain restrictions to them, otherwise, it is almost an invincible ability. Robin and Law understand Ross' meaning and thought to themselves. Speaking of it, your ability, too, is limited by the speed of response. Ross turned to look at Law next to him. Law's Surgeon fruit is capable of exchanging positions within the room range. It can be exchanged with sandstones and even air. But it is limited to Law reaction speed. The faster his reaction, the faster is the speed of exchange. And because of space movement, it is not limited by physical strength, but his ability will consume a lot of stamina, which can be regarded as a kind of limitation. As Robin and Law pondered, Lafitte looked up and turned to Ross and said, "Captain, I got this from Don Quixote family before." He shook his wrist and a delicate devil fruit appeared in his palm, the Logia sand fruit that was taken from Gladius. Ross recognized the sand fruit, one of the 3 fruits he especially told Kaku and others to collect. Logia devil fruit is different from Paramecia and Zone in appearance. It is the easiest type to judge. For example, flame fruit has flame color and there is swirl flame pattern on its entire body. Logia sand fruit. Ross took the sand fruit from Lafitte and looked at it carefully in front of him. He smiled and said, Don Quixote family's trading network is huge and it's doing a good job. Whoop, it is indeed. Lafitte raised the corner of ceremonial and looked at Law next to him. They also have to deal with Don Quixote family, and one of the reasons for dealing with Don Quixote family is the existence of Trafalgar Law, their ship doctor. But this fruit cannot be used for the time being. All four of them are devil fruit users, they don't really have any use of the sand fruit right now. Ross measured sand fruit and said, rest assured, it will come in handy sooner or later. Logia's fruit will be a powerful battle force as long as it's used well. As he spoke, he put sand fruit away and looked around him as it grew darker. He originally intended to fly over the red line, but since he has already descended into the sea, it is better to go from the Fisherman Island, so as not to encounter Kizaru when flying to the sky. Dressrosa. Inside the central city fort, Doflamingo is sitting on a sofa with a Den Mushi in his hand, listening to the news from Den Mushi, with a sinister smile on his face. Running to the Sabodi archipelago and killing St. Charles? He has always been concerned about the intelligence of the Ghost Hand pirates. As far as he knows, the main ship of the Ghost Hand pirates has disappeared and the bounty order of Great Axe Shilu has been withdrawn. Only 3 Captain Cadres headed by Ross are still fleeing and have become bereaved dogs. Unexpectedly, the group ran to the Sabodi archipelago and retaliated by killing a Tenryubito. Doflamingo used to be a Tenryubito, but because of a series of things he lost his Tenryubito's identity. Even if he took his father's head to Holy Land, he still didn't get approval and couldn't get back the identity of Tenryubito, so he hated Tenryubito very much. The St. Charles family was one of the Tenryubitos who opposed him in regaining his identity. Fufufuful, interesting. I reckon there will a major mess in Marijoy soon. Doflamingo couldn't help but laugh and his strange laughter echoed in the city palace. Trable also slid crawling over the ground, flicking his nose and grinning. Hey, Ghost Hand pirates killed a Tenryubito, it's really good news. Doflamingo has to deal with both the Ghost Hand pirates and Tenryubito. Now that the Ghost Hand pirates has killed a Tenryubito, there is no more pleasant news. Just as Doflamingo and Trable laughed, the Den Mushi on the table suddenly rang again. Purru. Doflamingo took over the Den Mushi with a smile on his face. I am very sorry, young master. From the other side of Den Mushi, it was the voice of Gladius and his tone was extremely depressed. Sand fruit was taken away during the transaction. Doflamingo's smile froze on his face for an instant. Trable beside him also stared. His tone was very annoying. What did you do, Gladius? How could someone rob us? Who dares to break our Don Quixote family deal? Subordinates, willing to take responsibility and punishment. Gladius said in a dry voice. The situation was special and it was not possible to confirm the identity of the other party. However, according to the survey, it should be Demon Sheriff Lafitte of the Ghost Hand Pirates. This sentence made the atmosphere in the city fort suddenly fell into a strange silence. Doflamingo's face is completely stiff, he can't smile anymore. At the same time, Ghost Hand Ross killed Tenryubito St. Charles in the Sabodi archipelago and confronted Marine Headquarters Admiral Kizaru and injured him. This news quickly spread in the entire sea. If the news about the Ghost Hand pirates in the past just shocked the big powers, this piece of news left the entire world in silence. Killing a Tenryubito, fighting and injuring a Marine Admiral. It is simply an incredible event of dreams. The weak Ghost Hand pirates who could have fallen at any point by in front of the irritated government and Marines previously has grown up to this point where they dared to kill a Tenryubito and injured an admiral and escaped. Overnight, the sky turned upside down, Marine Headquarters. At this moment, the Marine Headquarters has already become a mess. Walking in the corridor one can see a large number of Marines rushing in and out of the headquarters, some people with a trace of cold sweat on their forehead. In the top office, Fleet Admiral Sengoku was covering his forehead with a very depressed face. Aokiji went after Ghost Hand Ross and Ross ran away from the sky. Kizaru went after Ross. As a result, the other party ran away from the sea. Naturally, that was not the point right now. The point was that Ross killed a world noble Tenryubito in the Sabodi archipelago. Sengoku, you're coming to Holy Land right now, and Aokiji, Kizaru, come along too. On the other end of Den Mushi, The voice of the former Marine Fleet Admiral, the current Commander-in-Chief, Steelbone, Kongs came. It was only a few years since he left Marine Fleet Admiral's post, and now Marines had caused so much trouble that now Tenryubito has gone to Marijoy and scolded government officials at all levels. Yes, Commander Kong. Sengoku's eyebrows were almost twisted together, his fists pinched and his heart was furious, but at this time he could not break out and only responded to the voice on the other side of Denmushi. In this office, there are a total of 6 people, in addition to Sengoku, Aokiji, Kazaru, and Akainu, the 3 Marine Admirals, plus 2 Special Vice Admirals Crane and Garp. Ha ha ha, did that kid kill a Tenryubito? Garp had just arrived at the office, and he had just heard about it. As soon as he came in, he grinned and laughed unconcernedly, instantly destroying the oppressive atmosphere. Garp. Sengoku stared at Garp angrily and shouted, "How can you still laugh at this time? Don't you know how serious this is?" Garp saw Sengoku angry and forcibly suppressed his smile and waved his hand at Sengoku. In his eyes, Tenryubito is a group of trash. It gives him quite a pleasure to hear that one died. This is one of the reasons why he has repeatedly refused to be promoted to Admiral. Once he became Admiral and a Tenryubito was offended, he would have to be dispatched immediately to give Tenryubito a head. This is undoubtedly something Garp can't stand, and he won't run to give Tenryubito a head. Sengoku's face turned blue, but there was nothing he could do with Garp. He turned to Kazaru and Aokiji and said, "Kazaru, Aokiji, come with me to Holy Land." Kazaru did not have a foolish attitude at this time, and the whole person seemed a little withered, not afraid, but this troublesome thing was spread out by him, which is really the first time since he became Admiral. Aokiji's face was not very good either, although his attitude toward Tenryubito is not good. In Florian Triangle C before, if he could catch Ross, it would not cause such a troublesome event now. Akainu's face is not very good looking, although these incidents have nothing to do with him, but Ross's affairs, if calculated from the beginning, still involve him here. This time it's a terrible mess. Crane watched Sengoku and Aokiji and others walk out of the room. He shook his head and there was a glimmer in his wise eyes. Garp found a pack of cactus shellfish and sat down on the sofa, eating and saying, "Let that fellow do his pirate hunting in peace and stability." Akainu left the office. Because it happened in the eyes of the public and it was too late to block the news, it was impossible to press it afterward. What's more, the government and the interior of the Marine are already in a mess. 3 days later, countless people were watching. About the new bounty for the Ghost Hand Pirates, Surgeon of Death Trafalgar lost 60 million berries, Devil Child Nico Robin 120 million berries and Demon Sheriff Lafitte 200 million berries. As Captain, Ghost Hand Ross, the principal of the murder of Tenryubito, his suspended bounty jumped to a terrible height. 1 billion berries. Whether escaping from Marine Admiral or killing World Noble Tenryubito, there is no doubt that he can afford the terrifying bounty of 1 billion berries. This kind of reward does not need to be halfway in advance, even in the second half of the Grand Line, New World. This bounty also jumped to the front, reaching the level of 3 disasters, second only to the 4, Emperor. And all of this, Ross and his party still do not know it. 9 kilometers under the sea. At this depth, the pressure from the sea has become terrifying, the surrounding sea has become dark, and Ross's control of the distortion wall has shrunk to almost the edge of the ship. In fact, Ross and others can no longer determine how many meters deep the seafloor is. Fisherman Island is recorded as 10,000 meters deep, but in fact, the whole Fisherman Island is spherical and its diameter is not only 10 kilometers, so the Fisherman Island is still in the deeper seafloor. The so-called 10,000 meters is just a proxy for very deep and very deep. No one knows how long it has been. Even Ross was under tremendous pressure, his forehead gradually overflowed with sweat, and a dark seafloor finally appeared bright. Looking in the direction of the light, a planet-like island is wrapped in a huge double-layered bubble, suspended in the sea. At last, this is the rumored Fisherman Island. Robin stood not far from Ross, and when Fisherman Island finally appeared, the worry in her eyes slowly dissipated. Turning to Fisherman Island, her eyes twinkled. Law and Lafitte also came to the bow and looked in the direction of Fisherman's Island. Even though their personalities were calm, the scenery of Fisherman's Island was still amazing. Ross did not speak. He sank the ship to Fisherman Island with the power of distortion. His stamina was in constant depletion. Even with tenacious talent, he had already seen the bottom. When he saw the Fisherman Island, he immediately controlled the ship to dive towards the Fisherman Island. The slow dive ship, under Ross's power, accelerated abruptly and did not go around the Fisherman's Island's front door. Instead, it went straight through the bubbles above the slope. Buzz. Fisherman Island is wrapped by double bubbles. There is no seawater in the center of the two bubbles. Generally, if a ship runs hard, it will fall directly to the bottom. But Ross's ship has no such problem. After passing through the first bubbles, it shakes a little and hovers in the air immediately. Allowing the ship to hover and float in the air is much easier than proposing a wall of distortion that protects the entire ship from the deep seabed. Huh. Ross breathed a sigh of relief when the ship got into a double bubble. Originally, he planned to bypass the Fisherman Island and get to New World directly through the sea channel, but he overestimated himself. He did not have such strong stamina. Ross adjusted slightly to control the ship through the second layer of bubble and landed on a beach clearing near the edge of the Fisherman's Island, where it quickly and steadily stopped. Pirate ship? Some of the fishmen on the beach, seeing the fallen pilot ship, showed some strange eyes. Not all of them showed fear. If it had been in the first few years of Great Age of Pirates, when pirate ship had rushed into the Fisherman Island, all the fishmen would have dispersed and fled for their lives. But, since Whitebeard has inserted his flag into the Fisherman's Island and listed the Fisherman's Island as his own territory, the pirates passing by here have barely dared to rush to the island to hunt down the mermaids and fishmen. The weak pirate will be blocked directly from entering, and the powerful pirate with the high and strong strength is very clear about what kind of existence is Whitebeard. Almost no one provokes Whitebeard before entering the New World. Mermaids, such rare species. Lafitte stepped down from the boat and looked at the distant mermaids, who either hid or jumped into the water, laughing and appreciating most of them. Law carried the demon knife on his shoulder and whispered, "It doesn't seem that they are afraid of pirates. This is normal because it's Whitebeard territory." Ross walked slowly from the rear, his eyes slightly deeper. If Whitebeard's power can be much larger and bigger than the world government, then he will be the actual world government. There is only a power in this world, and there is only a strong and weak one. At New World, at the level of Yonko, 4 emperors, the division of power and territory is clear, and everything in their territory is also sheltered by them. At this level, the so-called government and pirate are hard to distinguish clearly. If the government's existence is defined as order, and the existence of pirate is defined as chaotic, then at the level of Yonko, 4 emperors, there is no longer chaos, but a corresponding order. If the power of Whitebeard pirates is to be much larger and bigger than the world government, then there will be something that looks like Whitebeard government and Tenryubito pirates, which seems ridiculous but seems to be the case. Every year, Tenryubito collects heavenly gold from all over the world. All the people have to hand over their savings to supply Tenryubito. In fact, it is called legal plundering. World government. Its essence is a bigger, and they are just more orderly pirates, nothing more. No wonder there's a change in the system where he can be rewarded by killing Marines. To understand this, Ross also has a deeper understanding of talent systems reward rules. The essence should be hunting the strong. So killing Lucci of CP9 got him some rewards. By killing Shichibukai, he will get more rewards, but killing a Tenryubito awarded him with nothing, because in the system's judgment, the Tenryubito killed by him is only garbage that has privilege but no strength. Come on, let's go in. Breathing the air of the Fisherman's Island on the beach, Ross opened his eyes and walked towards the inside of the Fisherman's Island. Now that he has come to Fisherman Island, he will take a break and stop by to see the Sea King, one of the 3 ancient weapons, Mermaid Princess Shirahoshi. Of the 3 ancient weapons, Ross knows best as Sea King, who can communicate with Sea Kings of the ocean and command the powers of Sea Kings. Whatever biota is the strongest in the world, in front of the Sea King class, whether it is human or the giant clan, all of them have to stand aside. The giant elephant Zunisha carrying Zo, whose single trunk attack defeated one of the 3 disasters Jack, and there are more than a dozen Sea Kings of that size and power in the sea. These super large Sea King classes may not have any chance of defeating Marine Admiral and Yonko, 4 emperors, but it is easy for them to destroy an island. The so-called power to destroy the world is not the power of being invincible in the world. It is the power that can ruin the world. If Shirahoshi issued an order to destroy all the islands in the world, then Yonko, 4 emperors, and Admiral can do whatever they want to stop the Sea Kings, but there will still be countless islands destroyed by the Sea Kings. This is the so-called destruction of the world. Whether it is Uranus or Pluton or Sea King, they are all nuclear weapons, Ross will not let them go in another hand until he has the power to truly control and protect the lockboxes. But by the time he has the strength to fight Yonko, 4 emperors, pirates, even against the marine headquarters, the ancient weapons will be in his hands and he will have all the powers in this world. The other side. Somewhere in a delicate street paved with shells, a ship flying the flag of world government appeared, but the whole ship was broken, the mast was broken, a piece was missing at the edge and it seemed to have been gnawed on by the sea kings. A lot of fishmen and mermaids were gathered in amazement, and at this time, a gun sound rang in front of the ship and echoed on the street. Wheezing. Wheezing. The beast. How are all dead, this bunch of useless waste? Tenryubito Myasgard was lying there breathless, bloody, with a gun in his hand and a wisp of smoke at the mouth of the guns. Since Jinbei had recently accepted the Shichibukai Treaty as 7 warlords of the sea, he was very unhappy with the full amnesty of the fishermen slaves. As a Tenryubito, he came to the fisherman island by ship to try to catch the slaves himself. As a result, he was attacked by the sea kings halfway and his attendants were completely destroyed in order to protect him. Get the mask, fish. Myasgard lay there with the gun in his hand pointing to the fishermen around him. Although he became weak because of serious injuries, he still showed strong rampancy and incomprehensibility. Kh. The stench of the fish here is killing me. I don't want to bring the mask, hurry up and save me, idiots. Many fishmen and mermaids looked at Tenryubito lying there with serious injuries using the look at me and I look at you policy. No one knew how to deal with it for a while. It's the first time that Tenryubito has come to the fisherman island. When Myasgard raised his hand to his gun and saw all the fishermen and mermaids standing silent around him, he cried out with great difficulty, "You fools! Call the doctor! Call, I'll die if I am not treated." By this time, the guards of Dragon Palace had arrived. The captain looked at the scene, hesitated, turned to the guards behind him and asked, "What about the medical team?" "They are already here, but what exactly should we do with that fellow?" There was hesitation on the guard's face behind him. As a member of the fisherman island, it was almost impossible to say that he would have a good feeling for Tenryubito. Moreover, the Tenryubito was so aggressive and arrogant that he thought them as his slaves even when he was dying. While the guards hesitated, the fishermen of the Sun Pirates and Jinbei's subordinates slowly came forward with weapons and stared coldly at Myasgard. There are several of them who used to be slaves to Tenryubito. "Hey, what do you want to do?" The guards and the fishmen around them were shocked when they saw the members of the Sun Pirates coming forward. Some people opened their mouths nervously and asked. Instead of paying attention to them, the people of the Sun Pirates walked towards Myasgard step by step with a cold face and a look of destructiveness in their eyes. "Stop it, you guys. He's Tenryubito. Once you do anything to him, even Shichibukai's amnesty will be directly ineffective." Watching the Sun Pirates move towards Myasgard, someone nervously tries to stop them. The fishman of the Sun Pirates ignored the call and the first one pulled out a gun and pointed it at Myasgard and said indifferently, "On land, your dignity can only be maintained by Marine Admiral's compulsory mission, but here is the seafloor. As long as the islanders remain silent, your death will be counted as a shipwreck." Hearing this sentence, the surrounding fishmen and mermaids suddenly realized something. "That's right. I'll keep silent, is that all right?" Many fishmen began to clamor for it. They have hesitated before but now things have changed. Some even showed fierceness and are thinking of killing Myasgard themselves. The first fishman looked at the dying Myasgard, but he lost his interest in torture. His eyes twinkled with a cold light as he pulled the trigger. Whiz! But just then, a figure rushed over, rescued Myasgard, and blocked the bullet fired at Myasgard with her shoulder. She's Odahime, Princess of Fishman Island, His Royal Highness. Seeing this scene, the faces of the fishman and mermaid around them changed as no one thought that Odahime would rush over and would be injured. "Everyone put down your guns." The injured Odahime's forehead overflowed with sweat. She raised her head slightly with difficulty, looked at the fishman with guns beside her and opened her mouth in silence. On one hand, it is impossible to watch a Tenryubito being killed by the fishman because of her kindness. On the other hand, if Tenryubito is rescued, it may bring some changes to the status of Fishman Island. Not far away, the 6-year-old mermaid Princess Shirahoshi and the other 3 princes came close, watching Odahime hurt. Shirahoshi and her shark and others all showed panic and worry. While Odahime's voice was slightly painful, trying to get the nearby fishman to put down the guns, Myasgard behind her picked up his gun and pointed to Odahime. But wicked fish, seeing this scene, All the fishmen in the vicinity were angry. Jinbei, standing in the crowd, shouted and was about to rush over, but it seemed a little too late. Bang! Mjosgard pulled the trigger. A bullet shot at the Princess Odahime, but because of Mjosgard's weakness and trembling wrists, it did not shoot straight at Odahime and seemed to pass her by. But just as the bullet hit halfway, an invisible force suddenly spurred from a distance, crossed a ripple in the void and hit the flying bullet straight. Bang! Almost instantly, the bullet was completely destroyed, and the force that caused the air to appear with a strange distortion, after destroying the bullet, fell on the ground again and instantly created a finger-size hole on the ground whose bottom couldn't be seen. At the top of a shellfish building not far away, Ross slowly retrieved his finger, stepped out with indifferent eyes, and appeared in the scene in a flash. Her Highness the Princess. Human? Many fishmen looked at Odahime in horror and worry as Ross suddenly appeared on the scene. Odahime then realized that the Tenryubito behind her had fired his gun at her. She watched as Ross suddenly appear on the scene and recalled the sound of the gun and that she was not injured. She was slightly shocked and soon realized what had happened. Garbage will always remain garbage. Ross looked at Mjosgard with indifference. After being rescued by Odahime, he fired on Odahime back. He tried to kill someone who saved him. It was probably only Tenryubito who could do that. Ross stood there, noticing Odahime's gaze behind him, and without waiting for the other person to speak, he calmly said, "This Tenryubito, let me handle it, Princess Odahime." "You are?" Odahime watched Ross's figure slightly. Ross is human. It can be seen at this moment, but Ross's figure made her a little familiar, but she could not think of this familiarity in this instant. She didn't know what Ross was going to do about Tenryubito. When she was about to say something, the guards at the rear had already rushed up and blocked her behind. It is impossible for them to let the princess continue to take risks. You are human, you lowlife worm, what did you just say?" Mjosgard was shocked by the sudden appearance of Ross. In response, he also found that Ross was human. When he thought of what Ross had just said, he immediately showed a trace of anger. He is a world noble Tenryubito, and this human being dares to say that he is garbage. His anger was overwhelming. He raised his gun and tried to fire it at Ross, but before he could take aim at Ross, there was a sound of pulling the trigger. "Can I kill him, Captain?" Lafitte appeared next to Mjosgard with a strange and sinister smile on his face, holding a gun in his hand. The gun's muzzle rested on Mjosgard's head. It was the first time since he was born that Mjosgard had a gun pointed at his head. You, his eyes showed fear again. He thought Ross, a human being, would not dare to resist him. He did not expect him to be madder than those fishmen. He directly pulled a gun on his head. "Kill me, don't kid me. I'm Tenryubito, how dare you? Do you know a St. Charles?" Ross stood there, looking down at Mjosgard and interrupting his words with a trace of horror and disbelief. Mjosgard coughed violently, and his eyelids began to faint because of serious injuries. St. Charles? Well, I killed him," Ross calmly said. Mjosgard's expression was instantly solidified on his face. His eyes showed a trace of horror and incredulity. Naturally, he could not believe Ross's words, but someone dared to say that he killed a Tenryubito, which was already enough to categorize him as a lawless madman. Panic filled his whole body, and with serious injuries, he was finally and completely unconscious and he fell to the ground. Lafitte still pointed his gun to Mjosgard, waiting for Ross's order. Ross looked at Mjosgard, who had fallen unconscious, and was about to wave at Lafitte, but he thought about something and changed his mind after a little thought. Take him back and let law give him a little treatment, he may come in handy. He has already killed one Tenryubito and it will require a little effort to kill another. It's better to keep one alive. Among law's surgeon fruit abilities, one is called mind exchange surgery, which allows two people to exchange their bodies, or their minds and hearts. In a sense, this ability is actually a kind of old surgery, but it needs to be replaced and the cost is too great. Law doesn't have the ability to do a heart exchanging surgery, but if he continues to exercise, he will be able to comprehend it sooner or later. At that time, the Tenryubito may be of some use. Death in some places, it's much more meaningful than dying on the Fishman Island. Wait, where are you going to take him? Princess Odahime looked at Lafitte, who was taking the Tenryubito away and couldn't help but ask. She didn't hear what Ross said to Lafitte because Ross used the sound distortion, only Lafitte could hear it. Somewhere where he truly belongs. Ross turned to Odahime and smiled gently. This is not the place to talk. If you can you take me to the Dragon Palace? Odahime had known about Tenryubito's gun before and she guessed Ross had saved her. When she heard Ross's words, she looked at the crowds of fishmen around her and finally nodded slowly. At that moment, Jinbei finally remembered Ross's identity and looked at Ross with a look of surprise in his eyes and said, "Your Highness, he's the captain of the Ghost Hand Pirates, Ghost Hand Ross." Ross's killing of Tenryubito and intelligence of the fierce battle between him and Marine Admiral has not yet been delivered to the Fishman Island and his impression of Ross remains on the pirate with a bounty of 440 million berries. But even a pirate with a bounty of 440 million berries is a terrible figure. The sand crocodile, one of the Shichibukai, died by Ross's hands. I already know. Odahime nodded slowly. She thought of Ross's identity faster than Jinbei, but she did not break it. On one hand, she did not discriminate against pirates and on the other hand, Ross had just stopped Tenryubito's gun for her. Jinbei also knows that this is not a place to talk. Although Ross is a dangerous person, he can't make any conflicts here anymore. Otherwise, so many people, even the princess, are here. He has no confidence to protect so many people while fighting Ross. Everyone scatters, that's the end of Tenryubito's story. No one should pass it on. Jinbei stared at Ross for a moment, took a deep breath and opened his mouth to tell the nearby fishmen and mermaids. His prestige was still very high among them. The nearby fishmen and mermaids nodded in succession. But Ross, just in case, let Lafitte hypnotize the people here and let them forget what happened before. Only a few people, such as Jinbei and Odahime, were unaffected by hypnosis. Treat Her Royal Highness as soon as possible. The medical team came quickly and put Odahime on the stretcher and quickly dealt with the wound on her shoulder. At this time, Princess Shirahoshi, Megalo, and other princes also ran over, surrounded by medical teams, heading for the direction of the Dragon Palace. Megalo, Shirahoshi, I'm fine. Odahime smiled at Megalo and Shirahoshi and others and made herself look as if she was doing nothing, signaling them not to worry, while looking at Ross not far away and saying, "You must thank him." Compared to the back scene that happened behind Odahime, Megalo, Shirahoshi, and others have seen the scenes of Ross more clearly. Although Ross is a human being, they still feel very grateful. "Ah, arigato. Thank you, Ross-sama." In Shirahoshi's big eyes, there seems to be a trace of tears that have not been wiped off. Because of Ross's appearance, this time she did not wake Sea King's ability and did not call the Sea Kings. Ross slightly smiled at Shirahoshi, who is much bigger than him at only 6 years of age. Odahime is thinner than him. It is hard to believe that they are mother and daughter. Isn't Neptune having an affair? Ross thought of something wicked in his heart. That is, the mermaid princess Shirahoshi. Robin came to Ross next to Shirahoshi and others who were walking in front of Odahime and put her fingers on her chin, revealing a touch of thought. The legendary ancient weapon, Sea King Poseidon, Ross nodded and said with a distorted voice, "I stopped her awakening. If this power got awakened in public's eye, we would have to trouble Lafitte to do group hypnosis, but as a mermaid princess, she will awaken this power sooner or later." Robin's eyes flickered slightly, wondering what to think of, and finally gave a light sigh. What happened in that void century? Why did it leave behind the poneglyph stone tablet? Why did it leave behind the ancient weapons that could destroy the world? What did the world government want to cover up? Everything was a huge mystery in her mind, however. After becoming a crew member of the Ghost Hand Pirates and all the way to here, the distance to truly open this mystery is no longer a distant distance to reach. Dragon Palace. When Odahime returned to the Dragon Palace city, she was immediately taken to the medical room for treatment and Ross came to the front hall. The entire hall was so magnificent that even many palaces in the human world were far less brilliant than here. Large pearls, corals and other things that are extremely precious to human beings can be seen everywhere in Dragon Palace. There are so many treasures hidden in the seafloor. At this time, Ross is sitting on a chair and in front of him is Knight of the Sea, Kaikyo, Jinbei. In general, Jinbei will not enter the Dragon Palace, but a dangerous character Ross has come in so he must also follow up. Shichibukai, Knight of the Sea, Kaikyo, Jinbei. After Ross enjoyed the view of the Dragon Palace, his eyes returned to Jinbei and there was a hint of deep meaning in his eyes. If he had met Jinbei earlier, he might have thought about Jinbei, Shichibukai, but now he has killed 2 people. Crocodile and Gecko Moria and Doflamingo will sooner or later die by his hands. In the case of continuous decline, the significance of killing Jinbei is very low. In contrast, it is more important to hold the Fishman Island in hand. Thank you for saving Her Royal Highness. Nevertheless, I don't know what you want to do, but I hope you don't mess around here, otherwise, this old man will stop you. Jinbei looked at Ross with a solemn look. Ross came to Dragon Palace as a pirate, and it is natural that he would have the worst intentions. If he was at sea, he had absolute confidence to fight Ross, but on land, he was not absolutely sure of winning over a pirate with a bounty of 440 million berries. Don't be so hostile. Ross looked at Jinbei and said, what would you say if I asked you to give up your Shichibukai position and asked you to join the Ghost Hand Pirates? Jinbei shook his head and refused. I'm sorry that I can't join you. Although you are kind to Her Royal Highness, I still need Shichibukai's identity to protect the safety of the Fishman Island. That's a pity. Ross leaned gently against the back of the chair and looked up at the ceiling covered with shells and pearls. In the past, he had been faced with various threats and had no time to think about the direction of the future, but now that he had the strength to defend himself under Marine Admiral, his mentality had changed. What is his ultimate goal? Yonko, 4 emperors, pirate king. No, none of them. Since killing a Tenryubito on Sabodi Archipelago, Ross has had the intention of replacing the world government. Although it is more difficult than defeating all Yonko, 4 emperors, and becoming the king of pirate, it is not absolutely impossible for him to do with the advantages of the talent system. If one day, he really defeated Marine and defeated the world government, then the Ghost Hand Pirates would remove their pirate's name and become the new ruler of this world, and all the main members on his ship would become one of the rulers. Like the 20 kings who founded the government 800 years ago. Naturally, he will not say these words, because so far it is only a possibility, and the preliminary plan has just begun. Robin did not follow them to the Dragon Palace, but in accordance with the instructions of Ross, she went to find the poneglyph stone monument of the Fishman Island, and Law and Lafitte did not come, so there is only Ross in the main hall. Not long after, a male mermaid wearing a crown came in. His Highness Neptune. When Jinbei saw the other party come in, he immediately saluted him. Although he was 7 warlords of the sea and the leader of the Fishman Island today, he was still very respectful to the royal family. You don't need to be so formal, Jinbei. Neptune looked at Jinbei with a laugh and said, you haven't been to Dragon Palace for a long time. As he said, he turned to look at Ross and said, thank you Lord Ross for saving Odahime. I have already made people prepare a banquet, please be sure to accept my thanks. It was nothing. How is His Highness Odahime? Ross asked Neptune. Neptune laughed and said, it's nothing serious, but she was rushing out to find you and was stopped by me. She'll come back later. She is injured, she needs to rest. I'll stay in the Dragon Palace for a while. By the way, the tea here is very good, Ross said with a slight smile. Jinbei saw Ross come to Dragon Palace and nothing happened. Neptune appeared very calm and his heart gradually eased down. However, he still does not trust that Ross who is staying in the Dragon Palace, so he requests Neptune to stay in the Dragon Palace, and Neptune naturally agreed. A few days later, in the huge garden of Dragon Palace, Princess Shirahoshi, a 6-year-old mermaid, is sitting on a lawn next to the poneglyph stone that has been found and moved here by Robin. Although Robin prefers things like Cerberus in the Florian Triangle Sea, but Shirahoshi's appearance is still very easy to the eyes, plus she is the body of the ancient weapon sea king Poseidon, so Robin keeps close contact with her, and Shirahoshi soon started calling her Sister Robin. On the other side, the princess, Odahime, was wearing a bandage on her shoulder and she looked almost recovered. 2 days ago, she learned the news from Sabodi Archipelago. Ross has killed a Tenryubito and left in a fierce battle with Marine Admiral. Her heart was shocked. Not only she, but Neptune and Jinbei were also shocked. It was unexpected that Ross had made such a big event. That Tenryubito, are you going to kill him, too? Doing so will only incessantly infuriate the world government, and it doesn't make any sense. Odahime tried to persuade Ross. Ross calmly responded, I don't intend to kill him now, but to make the world government angry, that's the point in itself. How can it be said that it doesn't make sense? Odahime's tone of voice was stagnant as Ross's attitude was more than that of the fishmen in the Sun Pirates. She could not help but show a complicated look and did not know how to persuade him anymore. Just then Ross turned to her and said, you're going to save Tenryubito and get a vote from him for the migration of the fishmen to shore. Odahime was shocked as her intentions were completely exposed to Ross. She was trying to retort a little. Not only did she was unable to persuade him, but she heard Ross's voice suddenly become a little solemn. Ross stared at her and said calmly and profoundly, "Don't think too much about equality, Odahime. Even if you get the signature of a Tenryubito and the consent of all the fishmen, can you guarantee that the human attitude towards the fishmen and mermaids will be the same as yours?" This. Odahime is stunned. Ross continued in a cold voice. "Don't say anything like, you believe that humans and fishmen can understand each other. Before you have absolute strength to ensure the safety of your people, letting them go ashore is tantamount to burying the whole Fishman Island." Odahime fell into silence. Ross's words pierced her heart sharply, like a slap in the face, piercing the part she had been reluctant to think about. Yes. Even if fishmen and mermaids can accept peaceful coexistence with human beings, can humans do it? Maybe, but she can't guarantee it, and that will be Danif equals Giroux for her people. In Ross's previous words, thinking of equality and coexistence is too much. But your Fishman Island is not completely powerless. Jinbei's strength needn't say much. Shirahoshi's ability is also extraordinary. Ross's words slowed down as he turned to look at Shirahoshi and Megalo playing with Robin in the distance with a faint smile. Shirahoshi. When Odahime heard Ross's words, she slightly startled. Ross mentioned Jinbei's strength, and it's easy to understand. After all, he is one of the 7 warlords of the sea. But Shirahoshi's ability made her think she had heard something wrong. What ability can a 6-year-old mermaid princess have? Ross does not intend to hide anything from Odahime, as Shirahoshi's ability will awaken sooner or later. Instead of exposing her to an unconscious awakening, it is better to let Odahime shelter Shirahoshi in advance. The Fishman Island should have had a legend. There will be a princess who will be born here once in a while who would have the power to communicate and command every sea king in the sea. Ross said, pausing for a moment, and in Odahime's astonished eyes, he said gently, "Yes, Shirahoshi is that princess." Odahime looked a little shocked and incredible at Shirahoshi in the distance. She could not believe Ross's words, but Ross obviously had no need to deceive her. "But Shirahoshi, before, when you were in danger, her ability almost immediately awakened, but I stopped it. It's better not to expose it." Ross interrupted Odahime, turned to her and said, "How to protect Shirahoshi? I don't need to say much about it. You know the meaning of that power very well." Odahime's forehead overflowed with a trace of perspiration. She glanced at Shirahoshi deeply and nodded slowly. "So instead of collecting meaningless signatures, it's your responsibility to protect Shirahoshi, because it's not just about the safety of Fishman Island, it's about the whole world." Ross slowly told Odahime. He didn't say anything and later overthrew the empty words of world government to the status of the Fishman's Island. Although his current identity enables him to say such things, it is not necessary. He just needed to wake Odahime up and tell her Shirahoshi's ability, and she will know what she should do. She was blinded by her kindness and peaceful coexistence. As for whether he will use the power of Shirahoshi in the future, it is not within his consideration. That is the future, at least not until he becomes a Yonko, 4 emperors. After waking up Odahime, Ross turned and walked in the direction of Shirahoshi and Robin. At this moment, Robin has sprouted a lot of arms, scratching Shirahoshi and letting her keep rolling. "Good, it's itchy, Sister Robin." "Stop it." Shirahoshi's tail kept shaking and tears seemed to be coming out of her big budding eyes. Robin smiled and lowered her arms. It was at this time that Ross came over. "Ross-sama." Shirahoshi saw Ross and immediately greeted in a respectful and soft voice. Ross looked at Shirahoshi and smiled, then nodded lightly at Robin, indicating that there was nothing wrong with Odahime. Seeing Ross's friendly attitude, Shirahoshi gradually abandoned her timidity and asked Ross as innocently as a child could, "Sir Ross, Sister Robin said that there are forests on land and there are real sky and sun. Is it true? I really want to go up and see it." "It's true." Ross smiled and said meaningfully, "When you get older, I will take you to the land to play. You are too young to leave home for now." Shirahoshi listened and the little child thought it was reasonable and nodded his head hard. "Well, that's a promise." Ross had an innocent smile on his face and extended his little finger at Shirahoshi. Shirahoshi also gladly reached out her little hand and touched Ross with her little thumb. After signing the abduction agreement with Shirahoshi, Ross turned around again and looked at Odahime, the princess who was coming towards them. "If there's anything that can't be handled and is related to Shirahoshi, if it's inconvenient to inform White Bear pirates, please let me know at any time." "Are you leaving?" Odahime nodded, accepting his future help, and also captured Ross's tone of separation. Ross gently smiled and looked up at the sky above the Fishman Island, with a deep look in his eyes. This time, when they set out again, they would arrive at the second half of the Grand Line, which is also the main battlefield, New World. After saying goodbye to Odahime, Shirahoshi, and others, Ross and Robin left Dragon Palace and went all the way to the place where their ship was docked. At this point, the guards of the Fishman Island have assisted Lafitte and others by sending the supplies to the ship, and they have already coated the ship. Coating the ship on land is difficult and expensive, but the machine that produces bubbles in the Fishman's Island can make a huge bubble that wraps a ship at once, so the coating becomes very simple. The coated ship slowly sailed away from Fishman Island. With the wall of the distortion to control sailing on the seabed, although he can use the distortion fruit to move it at once and take complete control of it, but the consumption of stamina is too big. The next place they will arrive is New World. No one knows what will happen, so he naturally has to save his stamina to deal with all possible things. Great Age of Pirates, 15th Years, New World. The Ghost Hand Pirates Captain Ghost Hand Ross with a bounty of 1 billion berries. This news has quickly spread throughout the New World and also fell into the hands of Yonko, 4 emperors, pirates and various forces. In the first half of the Grand Line, someone who could receive a bounty of 1 billion berries has never appeared before. It can be said that since the opening of the Great Age of Pirates, even in the history of the past, there has never been anyone with that high a bounty in the first half of the Grand Line. 1 billion. Even the Yonko, 4 emperors, pirates who sits above all, who regards the first half of the Grand Line as paradise and the latter half as their own playground, can't help but look at Ross's bounty poster. 1 billion berries, well, there is a little devil coming this way, but don't provoke me. Yonko, 4 emperors, BIGMOM looked at the 1 billion bounty poster, opened her mouth and smiled, and then she threw the bounty order aside, picked up the cake on the table and ate it. Everyone in New World's environment knows that it is extremely difficult to survive in the cracks left behind by Yonko, 4 emperors, pirates, and someone who acquired a billion bounty on his head in the first half of the Grand Line will never live in the cracks, territories not under Yonko, and he will definitely challenge a Yonko, 4 emperors. However, as one of the Yonko, 4 emperors, she has encountered too many challenges. Most of the challengers can't even see her face, because they couldn't get past her generals. As emperors, there is their pride. The name of Yonko, 4 emperors, is never self-proclaimed. Every one of the Yonko, 4 emperors, has experienced countless battles and accumulated numerous bones under his feet. These bones form the throne of the emperor. They never fear the challenge of the latecomers, they only sit on the throne, watching the latecomers walk hard to them and lose before their desperate power. 1 billion berries, another Yonko, 4 emperors, 100 Beast Kaido, did not give much comment. He took a sip of wine and threw the bounty order aside, grinning. If you are courageous, then come and challenge me. Over the years, no one has appeared that made him excited for a fight. He just goes ahead and picks fights with Yonko, 4 emperors, or sometimes a group of marines, which can make him a little excited. He has already reached this level. Somewhere along the coast, Red Hair Shanks holds Ross's bounty poster, his eyes twinkling and murmuring, while Beckman flips through the newspaper, smoking a cigarette. Beckman suddenly smiled and said, "Your hunch is quite accurate, Shanks." With the corner of his eye, he looked at the text in the newspaper and the photograph of Ross. His eyes were deep and he said, "This fellow, he is really going to see us again." Moby Dick. Whitebeard, still at his peak, was sitting on the deck, drinking, looking at the newspaper in his hand and the bounty poster clipped to it. Gura rah rah rah, there comes another little demon. He had a slight impression of Ross, but the impression remained that when a particular newspaper shocked the world, many people felt that the Ghost Hand Pirates would be quickly wiped out by the furious government and marine. But the result is that in a blink of an eye, the Ghost Hand Pirates has grown to this point, and it is enough to enter his eyes. I heard these guys like to hunt pirates. They're pirates for the purpose of hunting pirates. 1st Division Captain Marco stood next to Whitebeard with his head tilted to its side. The 3rd Division Captain Diamond Jozu sat down and grinned. They wouldn't come for us. In this sea, everyone knows what will happen if you mess with us. That's right. Marco smiled. Whitebeard glanced at Marco and Jozu, raised his hand and threw the newspaper and the bounty order in his hand into the sea. Seabed. How is that Tenryubito? Ross took back his eyes from Fishman Island, which was gradually fading away, and asked for Law. Law leaned against the side of the bulkhead and said with a slightly deep look, "He won't die, but that guy's last name, it's Don Quixote." Don Quixote, Mjasgard. The same surname as Doflamingo, obviously his identity belongs under the Don Quixote family. For 800 years, Tenryubito is not a single entity, but a huge group. Doflamingo belongs to one of the Don Quixote family. Oh, his last name is Don Quixote? Ross's eyes also flashed with light. He didn't expect the Tenryubito caught in the Fisherman's Island and the Doflamingo family to have a cousin. After his eyes glittered slightly, he calmly said, "You're not mistaken. Doflamingo used to be a member of Tenryubito, but he lost his Tenryubito identity because of some things. Why is Doflamingo able to spread the dark trade all over the world? His strength is far less than that of Yonko, 4 emperors, and his power is far less than that of Yonko, 4 emperors. But the trading network in the dark world is the core of the whole world. One of the reasons is that his original Tenryubito identity. Although this identity has lost its privilege, he is still a Tenryubito. With the identity of a Tenryubito, he can do too many things, not to mention that Doflamingo knows a lot about the secrets of Tenryubito and Holy Land, which are enough to shake the world. Tenryubito, it's more trouble than I thought. Law also knows exactly what Tenryubito's identity stands for. He knows that when he arrives at New World, the first thing he has to deal with is Doflamingo. He originally thought that Doflamingo was just an ordinary Shichibukai, but after boarding Ross's ship, he was constantly exposed to the secret intelligence about Doflamingo, which made him gradually realize that Doflamingo was not a very easy existence to deal with. It involves a lot. Don't worry, my promise to you will stand regardless of his identity. Ross calmly told Law after seeing his face. He didn't care about justice and didn't care about evil, but he would do it for the agreement he had agreed to. This is his guideline. Law looked at Ross and took a deep breath, slowly saying, "Thank you." The ship gradually left the Fishman Island, slowly passed through the hole at the bottom of Red Line under Ross and Lafitte's control, and finally came to the sea on the other side. As the ship floated up, a huge whirlpool of white snake-like currents suddenly appeared on the dark seafloor, winding and leading to an unknown end. "It's a whirlpool. Be careful," Lafitte immediately warned, and Ross calmly controlled the ship's rapid ascent, bypassing the eddy current with the help of distortion. Although he has enough strength now, it is still difficult to fight against this level of natural power. After all, it is the bottom of the sea. After bypassing the whirlpool current, the ship did not encounter any more crisis and went up smoothly. Robin took a shower while the ship was moving up and Ross went into the bathroom to wash as well. Crash. The ship finally rushed out of the sea and came to a hail-covered sea. At the same time, the bubble wrapped around the hull quietly broke and disappeared at that moment. The hail was raining all over the sky and crashing into the hull. Law and Lafitte fought back, and Ross came out in a white overcoat. Buzz. With the power of distortion swinging, large fist-sized hailstones were fixed in midair, sliding along both sides of the hull and eventually falling into the sea. This is the New World. With Ross sheltering the hull, Lafitte also made room to view sea maps and high-level log pose on his wrist. However, it is difficult to judge the sea here and their location is undetermined. Although there are 3 arrows on the log pose, it is difficult to know which islands they are pointing to and it is necessary to arrive at one of them first before determining their location. Very soon, Lafitte decided on the direction and sailed to the island where Pose was the most stable. The Ghost Hand pirates are all calm individuals. They are not impulsive like Straw Hat pirates. They naturally won't go away with Pose's weird island. Crack. 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 As the ship continued to sail, the hail began to grow bigger and bigger, and even hail the size of a human head appeared, which was enough to break through the hull in an instant, but all were blocked by Ross. It was a correct decision not to use the power of distortion to bring the ship from the bottom of the sea. No one knew how long it took, but the ship finally broke out of the hail-covered sea and came to a place that looked very calm. No matter the wind speed or the current, it did not seem unusual. It seems to be safe for the time being. Ross slowly lowered his arm and the wall of the distortion that sheltered the hull was taken back by him. But, almost immediately after Ross's voice fell, a sound suddenly came from under the hull. The whole ship flew up abruptly, rose suddenly, and came to the sky tens of meters away from the sea, and tilted over. Law and Lafitte and others were shocked and quickly pulled the things around them to stabilize their bodies. Robin was also surprised and unsteady and fell in the direction of Ross. Ross calmly reached out and took Robin in his arms, but instead of looking at her, he looked down at the bottom of the ship with a sharp look in his eyes. Sea Kings. Lafitte's gaze was fixed on the sea below. Just coming out of the hail sea, They entered the sea where such large sea king exists, and this is not even the calm belt. Sure enough, New World's sea is messy. The first half is a paradise compared to here. Hiss. An extremely harsh humming sound came from under the hull that left Lafitte, Law, and others' eardrums buzzed. Ross's eyes twinkled and the power of distortion's voice came out, dispersing the sound near him and Robin, and he released Robin and flew to the side of the ship. Now, the whole ship was crowned in midair by the head of a giant sea king with a body of thousands of meters in length. The ship was like a snack in front of the sea king. At this time, the sea king also found the ship on top of his head. The humming sound came because of this. A pair of huge eyes, the pupil was transferred to the top of the head. It suddenly shook his head and threw the ship up and whipped its tail. What is the concept of the power of the tail of a sea king, which is thousands of meters long? It is sufficient to destroy a street in an instant. Humph! Ross snorted and waved his arm, and the power of distortion came out and the hull was lifted. At the same time, he punched the huge tail that was slamming towards him.